If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 1 Moonlit World. Are you refusing to participate in the Holy Grail War in Fuiaki City? Well. The distant sound of bells echoed in the outskirts of London. The flickering flame blossomed at the man's fingertips. Looking at the black-haired youth sitting across from him, El Meloitu slowly lit his cigar, took a puff, and then exhaled a wisp of elusive smoke. His calm face revealed no surprised expression. As expected, the answer I anticipated. I've already told those guys that you wouldn't be swayed. After all, even the chance to make a wish directly to the root with the Holy Grail isn't really significant for you. The words may sound exaggerated, but El Meloitu spoke with a tone of certainty. This was because the black-haired youth in front of him was undoubtedly a Magecraft genius, making Waver, a magus with mediocre magic circuits who worked overtime every day, marvel at the unfairness of fate. In the field of magus, having become the lord of the Department of Modern Magecraft Theory at the Clock Tower, Waver Velvet had almost absolute confidence in his cheap apprentice picked up from the roadside. The reason was simple. He witnessed Reinhard, in just a short year, rise from an ignorant muggle to a dignified position in the Clock Tower. Grand, brand, pride, FES, cause, count, frame. These were the ranks of magus passed down by the Mages Association. Waver himself, as the lord of the Department of Modern Magecraft Theory, was currently only at the level of FES. In high emotional intelligence terms, he held the title of honorary FES thanks to his outstanding achievements in teaching his disciple. In reality, Waver's magical aptitude was quite poor, barely reaching the level of cause, struggling even with hypnosis on old ladies. His magic circuits were bluntly evaluated by his foster sister, Rains, as non-flammable garbage. It could be said that he was practically a placeholder. So much so that the long hair he now had was to conserve a bit more magical energy, and even the cigars he smoked were a form of mystic code, a special cigar he makes to relieve his panic and something to make him seem more lord-like. To put it bluntly, despite holding the position of one of the 12 lords at the Clock Tower, Waver's value as a magus was not very high. The sensation, the magical energy, felt less than good echo. This is also the reason why every time he receives guests, he has to bring along Grey as a personal bodyguard to prevent the assassins from killing him. And, compared to Waver's pathetic magical aptitude, Reinhardt's magic circuits underwent a qualitative and quantitative mutation in his brain, seemingly outstanding in both quality and quantity. This made Waver envy to the point of almost having a heart attack. Not to mention, his astonishing promotion to the rank of Pride within a year, even legendary magician like Zelrich, and that. Scarred Red seemed to have never shown such an exaggerated performance in their magus careers. The Clock Tower's ranking bestowed considerable importance on a magus's magical achievements. In simple terms, being able to fight was a crucial factor. However, the more important evaluation criteria were aimed at assessing the magician's broad and innovative understanding of magic, their understanding and construction of spells, and the magus's casting ability. Of course, if you were a second-generation magus, everything was different. The Clock Tower had very flexible criteria. In the simulated combat assessment for promotion, Reinhard easily defeated the ceiling designation enforcer, Bazet, known as the strongest at the FES rank. This performance was already considered astounding. Mainly due to his research paper titled Construction Ideas for Artificial External Micro-Magic Circuits Participating in Controllable Nuclear Fusion Processes, which was so shocking that it alarmed even the Clock Tower's hidden monsters, almost leading to a ceiling designation. Thanks to his thorough understanding during his year of studying at the Clock Tower, combined with the strong recommendations from the El Meloy family and the Animusphere family, Reinhard avoided being imprisoned under the pretext of ceiling designation and was directly granted the rank of Pride. Subsequently, the research paper that Reinhard put so much effort into was directly classified as the highest level secret of the Clock Tower and was not publicly published. This result made him lose the last bit of patience for the Clock Tower's outdated customs. Ridiculous. Pitiful. Regrettable. Although the Mages Association claimed mystery concealment as its first principle, even mischievous imps like Rains knew that it was just a gimmick. Holding on to such a noble cause made it convenient to suppress those independent magus, especially since the industry standards were set by the Clock Tower itself. They could punish as they pleased without mercy. The so-called principle of mystery concealment was just a convenient excuse. After all, even the ceiling designation issued could be casually revoked. Even with the full efforts of the ceiling designation enforcer, there was nothing they could do about the woman known as the Scarred Red. So, in the end, the ultimate decision fell on the law of the jungle. Officially, it was to conceal the mystery and restrict the publication of this paper. However, Reinhard was well aware that the true reason was, the clock tower, valuing bloodline heritage, did not want to see the development of secular technology, as it would render the various Magecraft they held in contempt as a laughingstock. Like deconstructing artificial diamonds, diamonds could only rely on blowing to provide value. Just like the modern Magecraft department now, since its establishment in the 19th century, it had always been looked down upon and ostracized by the aristocratic factions. The final handling of this matter by the clock tower disappointed Reinhard greatly. To pursue the daring act of refining the human body, violating taboos, and summoning souls but being afraid to publish a small research paper? Even if you brought in someone to replace you directly, pushing your own research results? As long as it could be published to promote the progress of the world, Reinhard didn't care about authorship or fleeting honors. His motive was very simple, he just wanted to survive. After all, this world was on the verge of destruction. Reinhard, 24 years old, people who are commonly called Isekai'd victims. When writing his doctoral thesis, he suddenly had a splitting headache, fainted, and was urgently taken to the ICU. After a CT scan, a blurry shadow was found in his brain, suspected of a malignant tumor, and various clinical manifestations matched the symptoms. At the most ambitious age, he was diagnosed with an incurable disease. After the initial shock, disbelief, and indignation, Reinhard emotionally accepted reality and gave up torturous chemotherapy. He decided to finish his thesis seriously and spend the last moments of his life peacefully. However, when he walked out of the hospital, Reinhard was not met with the dull and gloomy city sky but the drizzling streets of London. He had directly Isekai'd into London 2002 in moonlit world. His oriental face attracted the attention of the people on the street, and even chat and bank applications on his phones nearly became paralyzed. Fortunately, Reinhard's spoken English was fluent, and he was brought home by Gray, who was out buying bread. Finally, through Waver Velvet's recommendation letter, he entered the clock tower and became an international student. It was a good thing that the Londoners didn't speak Japanese, otherwise he would have been homeless because he couldn't communicate. After Isekai'd into the moonlit world, Reinhard found that he had awakened the ability called Clairvoyance. In the early stages of stabilizing the control of Clairvoyance, accompanied by severe headaches, he could occasionally foresee vague images of the future of this world in his dreams. All were scenes that would give people high blood pressure. The bloodborne plague, the fallen empire, the contingency, insect invasion, the warp storms. Tell me, is this really the moonlit world? Let me go home. In the not-so-distant future, various strange and dangerous disasters would ravage this world, ultimately plunging this land into a complete hell on earth. What's more, Reinhard discovered that his clairvoyance had never observed the future beyond 2016. This likely meant that humanity in this world would be extinct by 2016. Order collapse, life withering, civilization disappearing. Human history was on the brink of extinction. The images of the collapse of human reason foretold to Reinhard the tragic ending this world was about to face. Seeing such a future, Reinhard was somewhat numb. Even though he had become an Isekai'd victim, he should have led a life of glorious life, fight the Demon King, and build a harem like the protagonists in those Japanese novels. He should have welcomed the supposedly happy time like a dream. But why did it turn out like this? Isekai'd into the moonlit world, the original incurable disease had the possibility of being cured in the moonlit world view. However, before he could be happy, he suddenly learned that the world would be chaotic in just over a decade. It was as if he had suddenly Isekai'd into a fantasy world and was enthusiastically preparing to start a grand beast-eared harem, only to find out that this was an NTR-type fantasy world. Chapter 2 No one understands the Holy Grail War better than me. Foreseeing the impending doom of humanity, Reinhard had tried repeatedly to find a hospital gate to go back through, attempting to return to his original world, but unfortunately, it was to no avail. He had no choice but to accept reality once again. The silver lining in his misfortune was that, as an Isekai'd victim, despite not awakening any system despite his countless calls, Reinhard possessed extraordinary innate talent. After diligently mastering the preliminary use of clairvoyance, he finally realized, when conducting introspection, that the peculiar shadow in his brain was not a tumor but the dormant magic circuits awaiting awakening. Due to his exceptional quality and quantity, the magical energy spontaneously absorbed and overflowing from Reinhard's body caused intense headaches. If he didn't quickly activate and control it, it would be as fatal as a malignant brain tumor, he might not have more than a few months left to live. Under the recommendation of Waver Velvet, taking the back door, Reinhard embarked on his journey as an international student at the clock tower. After some time of theoretical studies, he gradually understood that the future observed by clairvoyance only represented a possibility. This explained the variations in the forms of disasters he foresaw, as world lines often held infinite possibilities. In other words, the future could be changed. If humanity could progress and develop faster, perhaps the bleak destruction ahead could be avoided. Thus, in addition to improving his survival abilities, Reinhard dedicated himself to advancing the world's foundational research, hoping to integrate science and Magecraft. Research topics like increased wheat crop yield under different ether concentrations, feasibility study of rune symbols in purifying contaminated water sources, and exploration of magic as an efficient clean energy source were among his projects. All of his magical research projects were guided by simple and practical principles. Unfortunately, the clock tower, representing the Mages Association, was deeply entrenched in outdated customs, filled with monopolies, bloodline discrimination, and narrow-minded prejudices. The so-called traditional Magus families, essentially akin to conservative feudal clans, were divided into various factions, engaged in political struggles, creating a corrupt quagmire that ensnared everyone who stepped into it. As a Magus, few cared about Muggles' thoughts or considered advocating for the interests of ordinary people. Not using Muggles as magical resources already made a Magus morally upright. In the moonlit world, Edward Elric's alchemy would be nothing more than an appetizer. Reinhardt's dazzling performance had made him a thorn in the eyes of many noble factions at the clock tower. His talents and actions continue to emphasize that Magecraft research must be integrated with scientific practice and work must be done to benefit the future of mankind, were seen as a direct challenge. For Reinhardt, the clock tower was a necessity due to his lack of options. Being a homeless Isekai'd victim in this moonlit world, even if he wants to live without thinking about these magical things, he can't, because after coming into contact with mysteries, he will inevitably attract people who have come into contact with other mysteries in the future as well. Besides that, time didn't allow him the luxury of making choices. Reinhard urgently needed the clock tower's resources to help activate and control the magic circuits in his brain for a cerebral upgrade. If he continued to delay, he might bleed from all 7 orifices and die. Rising in status at the clock tower would aid him in laying the groundwork for his plans. After being promoted to the rank of Pride, Reinhard had the qualifications to establish a magical workshop, allowing him to conduct discrete research on various studies. In summary, he was currently in a phase where he needed to rely on the clock tower rather than the clock tower relying on him. Thus, for the sake of his own survival, Reinhard could only choose the high-profile route, exposing some of his talents. The inevitable hostility that followed was just a side effect. For instance, the seemingly innocuous black box on the coffee table in front of him was a manifestation of insidious malice. After a majority vote in the Lord's Council, it was decided to grant Reinhard the opportunity to represent the clock tower in the Fuyaki Holy Grail War. Ostensibly, it was a rare opportunity, an extremely prestigious honor, and a recognition of magical talent. However, it was merely sugarcoating. As a first-hand witness of the Fourth Holy Grail War in Fuyaki, El Meloy II himself was well aware of its dangers. The current situation of participating in the Fifth War was akin to being a mind-clearing soldier destined for a sacrificial role. The Holy Grail in Fuyaki seemed to have been contaminated during the Fourth War, and just over a decade later, it was about to accumulate magical energy once again, initiating the Fifth Holy Grail War. While many at the clock tower coveted the Holy Grail, the gruesome fate of Kenneth and his fiancée was still vivid. Their magic circuits were severed, leading to the downfall of the El Meloy family's status in the clock tower, with the Animusphere family taking over. The battles between servants were already extremely fierce. And there was a possibility that the Holy Grail had been tainted. The impending Fifth War in Fuyaki was undoubtedly perilous, a life-or-death situation. As the pinnacle of the moonlit world, the clock tower, according to tradition, should send a representative. The question was, who would it be? Many eyes were watching. Eventually, this hot potato was tossed around until it landed in the hands of Reinhard in El Meloy II's classroom. After all, he was currently the top among the younger Magus at the clock tower, and due to his consistent obsession with Magecraft research, people believed he wouldn't refuse this rare opportunity. Because that was the Holy Grail, the lifelong pursuit of a Magus, the path to the root, the Holy Grail capable of granting any wish. You're being given this precious opportunity. If you can't handle it and fall short, don't blame Clock Tower, right? This plot was clear to everyone in London moonlit world. Standing on the moral high ground, the clock tower was beyond reproach. Listening to outsiders, they would only think it was a dedicated development of Reinhard by the council. The council was vigorously emphasizing how rare this opportunity was. But unfortunately, these guys couldn't guess. At the clock tower, was there anyone who understood the Holy Grail War better than Reinhard? As an anime fan who had only watched Fate series, Reinhard was completely puzzled by various settings in the subsequent Fate Grand Order. Having not played the mobile game was the most regrettable thing for him after Isekai'd into the moonlit world. He missed out on crucial information. However, the Fifth Holy Grail War was so famous that even a noob Fate enthusiast like Reinhard could recite its details. The polluted Holy Grail, corrupted heroic spirits, pleasure criminals everywhere, gangs of thugs. The highest frequency of gas leaks in Japan was during the Holy Grail War, and there was no way he wanted to be on the list of victims. Reinhard considered himself a person who cherished his life and lacked Emi Yashiro's luck. He also lacked the determination to stand as a righteous comrade. Moreover, even if Emi Yashiro was designated as the ultimate victor in all the plotlines of Fate/Stay Night, was his ending really good? Not to mention the 40 or so bad ends, just look at the insanity of that Archer guy. Ridiculing his immature past, he himself was the poor creature drowned in his own ideals. The phrase full of heroes was never a blessing. And who knew what weird things might appear in this world line after his Isekai'd to this moonlit world? Now that he was getting involved, even if he knew the plot inside out, his chances of leaving unscathed were 50-50. So, Reinhard chose to keep his distance. However, the tales of this Isekai'd victim were not convenient to be told to Waver. So, in response to this, Reinhard pondered for a moment and then calmly said, "I have no interest in the so-called Holy Grail." The black-haired youth lowered his eyelids. A wise man does not stand under a leaning wall. The idea of voluntarily putting oneself in danger for an elusive wish is just too foolish. My ideals are never based on vain wishes but on using my own hands to turn them into reality. Listening to his disciple's resolute answer, Waver let out a faint misty sigh. It's truly an enlightening determination. Yes, with your talent and abilities, you don't need the wish of the Holy Grail. I personally strongly agree with your decision. You are just too normal, Rain. But most magus are a bunch of people with issues in their heads. So, a normal person like you seems like an alien among them. Staying in the quagmire of the clock tower is like a pearl covered in dust. The puzzled Reinhard couldn't help but smile wryly. I'll take this as your praise, Professor. Dealing with disciples with normal minds is more comfortable than mediating between those annoying old folks. Waver took a puff of his cigar. I will explain the situation to the council, you don't need to worry. Even the grand position at the clock tower should not be your final destination. Looking at his cheap disciple. In just 1 year, Reinhard, who had been promoted to pride, made Waver had become the most sought-after special lecturer at the clock tower. The threshold of El Meloitu's classroom was almost trampled by students, leading to an increase in class hours, and the tuition fees were substantial. He taught classes every day with both pain and joy. However, Waver himself knew best. He didn't teach Reinhard much, at most, he guided him to get started. In the past year, muttering strange things like foundation and runes are similar to writing programs in language, Reinhard's progress was so rapid that it seemed like he was cheating. According to his own words, because he had worked in a profession similar to Magus, a barcode farmer or something like that, learning Magus was like a walk in the park. Waver didn't quite understand this. But there was no doubt that Reinhard might have already surpassed his professor in the field of Magecraft. Above Magecraft, there is a realm that transcends Magecraft, Waver said. That is the goal you should climb towards. A realm that transcends Magecraft. Reinhard chewed on these words. Are you referring to true magic? Yes. Waver nodded. Even your hope of returning home might be hidden in it. Returning home. Of course, it didn't mean buying a plane ticket to return home but returning to his original world. Yes, as a mentor, Waver Velvet knew that his cheap disciple was not from this world. After all, Reinhard suddenly appeared in London, without even a passport, and his strange ID card stated he was born in 99. When Reinhard showed Waver his phone. Faced with this ingenious technological marvel, Waver immediately understood the origin of the person in front of him. Although surprised, Waver was more fortunate to have encountered the real thing. Because, traveling to another dimension in the moonlit world had long been a precedent. That was the second magic, Operation of Parallel Worlds. Reinhard slowly uttered this term. Chapter 3. You will be the antagonist. The second magic. A legendary true magic mastered by the wizard marshal, Kisker Zelrich Twinorg. It allows the caster to freely travel between parallel worlds while maintaining the same identity. Reinhardt's Isekai'd phenomenon is highly likely to be related to it. However, this old jewel has been never seen for a long time now, and no one knows which corner of the world he is currently touring or what grand plans he is hatching. Therefore, rather than placing hope in such elusive legendary figures, Reinhard is more inclined to rely on himself to uncover the true nature of the second magic. If humanity is truly beyond salvation, at least he can create an additional escape route for himself. Yes, it is indeed the second magic. Waver exhaled a misty cloud of smoke. If it's you, Rain, you might really have a chance to step into that vortex, the root. Different from tricks like Magecraft, true magic is a genuine miracle that connects to the root. Throughout history, countless magus have pursued the root, engaging in various magical studies, human experiments, violating taboos, and even abandoning the baseline of humanity. However, very few have been fortunate enough to catch a glimpse of the root. A genius capable of surpassing the grand, with a chance to touch the root. Waver had such a high evaluation of Reinhard. His disciple Reinhard has the potential for the root. On that day, Waver could already imagine that if it happened, he would become a magician's mentor living in legends, right? Then, there would be no need to work overtime every day. To clear the huge debts sooner, to live a luxurious life of smoking one cigarette after another. The master tried hard to paint a rosy picture for the disciple. There's no need to care about the envy of small-minded people, focusing on your own path is the most important. Immersed in his generous fantasies, Waver luxuriously extinguished the cigar after just a few puffs in the ashtray. People will envy those who are ahead of them, but when faced with towering mountains, they can only stand and look up. Those old bags from the clock tower are better off left alone, without causing trouble for oneself by trying to build relationships with those old bags. Reinhard felt a bit disgusted at the thought. I never care about these boring malice, Reinhard shook his head. But, Professor, don't you feel regretful? After all, this is an opportunity you've been diligently pursuing for a long time. As the words fell silent, the Lord of the Department of Modern Magecraft Theory fell into a wordless silence. Waver, in a daze, stared into the ashtray as the sparks on the remnants of the cigar gradually extinguished. After a while, he finally shook his head gently. The Holy Grail War should not be the time for me and him to reunite. That's right. Waver Velvet himself was originally the one planning to participate in the war. Not for any other reason. As a loyal subject, he wanted to meet his king again, even if it was just a glance. But Reinhardt's resonant words directly struck Waver's soul, who was contemplating. If the king ordered you to live as a loyal subject, would risking danger just for the chance to meet him again truly be the meeting he desires? That's right. Doing something like bringing oneself back into the Holy Grail War just to meet the king again was ultimately a selfish and wishful thinking. Although nearly a decade had passed, the young man named Waver Velvet still hadn't moved on from that night in 1994. Even though he was now the Lord in the clock tower. It's really, no progress at all. Realizing his own immaturity, Waver, with a bitter smile, finally let go of his worries. He no longer busied himself for a spot in the Holy Grail War and, instead, kept the promise he made with the king, choosing to live well. There will be opportunities to meet again in the future. Waver touched his chest, and since then, he had kept the cloak fragment of the king by his side. In the profound journey of life, Rain, you are, in turn, my mentor. Recalling the heartfelt conversations he had with his disciple, Waver gazed at the black box on the coffee table with emotion. Something truly nostalgic. He had also taken such a relic from his teacher, Kenneth. Of course, it was taking, not stealing. How could you call it stealing in the world of Magus? The grand journey and the bonds forged between them also began with the Holy Grail War. Relic. How should I put it? Those old folks at the clock tower can only use their pathetic brain capacity in such a dark place. They claim to have carefully selected an extremely powerful relic for you. Waver emphasized those two very ironic words. However, they actually took out something almost insulting from the spiritual tomb of Albion. Are they trying to convey that my disciple is a heretical antagonist trying to subvert the rules of the clock tower? Hat. He knocked on the table with his knuckles. Waver's face revealed a meaningful smile. Rain, do you know what's inside this? What is it? Seeing the excitement on his disciple's face, Waver's slender fingers slowly turned the switch on the black box. With a crisp sound, the outer shell of the box opened, and the contents inside gradually came into Reinhardt's view. Is this a scale? Reinhardt squinted slightly, his eyes, as deep as an inkwell, observing the pure white scale with a black circular pattern embossed on it, resting on a crimson cushion inside the box. The ill-fated son of the white dragon, Waver said each word. It is said to be an inverse scale from its body. Never heard of it. Reinhard shook his head in bewildered amazement. The ill-fated son of the white dragon? This title sounded intimidating. Was it a heroic spirit from some moonlit world that he doesn't know? As an anime fan, Reinhard indeed had no impression of it. Not only that. With such an unlucky name, it didn't sound like a good person at all. Looking at the character Ill-Fate, Reinhard immediately understood why the old guys at the clock tower were repelled by him. A person with no heritage should be paired with the ill-fated relic? Tisk, what an insulting metaphor. If they were encouraging him to participate in the Holy Grail War, Reinhard thought that at least they would present him with some holy sword like Excalibur. After all, this is Britain, the clock tower, headquartered in London, must have quite a collection. You haven't heard of it, and that's for the best. Those guys bully you precisely because you haven't heard of it. Waver shook his head gently, somewhat sentimentally. In fact, not many people within the clock tower know about this hidden history. Simply because this is a part of history deliberately forgotten by Britain. Forgotten. Deliberately forgotten history. Reinhard repeated this information-rich statement. This was also his first close encounter with a relic. With great interest, he extended his right hand, picked up the dragon scale in front of him, and carefully examined it. The fingertips that came into contact with it felt a warmth reminiscent of jewel. Unexpectedly, at this very moment, a beautiful and melodious bell rang in Reinhardt's mind. Ding! What is this sound? Accompanied by the slow voice of the system. A grey mist rapidly spread in front of Reinhardt, completely obscuring his vision. Detecting a magical relic that meets the conditions, initiating the Antagonist simulator loading. 1%. 10%. 100%. 1000%. Breaking the limit. The Antagonist simulator has been loaded. Ready for the first simulation, please draw your initial talent. The white dragon's son who wants to pierce the inner sea of the planet. The secrets within, well, that's a long story. And according to the wild history I've come across, it's quite different from the current official records of Britain. In short, it's extremely rebellious. Well, since you're not from here, you can just listen to it as a story. So, this servant, if he's truly summoned, Rain, his compatibility with you might be quite harmonious. Since you're so interested, I'll reluctantly give you a brief explanation. Asleep. I haven't even started talking yet. Waver's lecture on the relic hadn't even begun. His disciple, as if having drunk too much alcohol, slumped on the sofa and fell into a deep sleep. This undoubtedly dealt a heavy blow to Waver's teaching confidence, as heavy as a withered arrow through the heart. El Meloitu's classroom lectures were always lively and full, and Reinhard was the first student to fall asleep during a class in his teaching career, directly robbing Waver of his important first time. Well, even though the class hadn't started yet. Tisk. Is researching all day too tiring? While the mysteries of Magecraft are fascinating, you should also pay attention to work-life balance. Due to frequent overuse of his brain, Reinhard occasionally fell into a daze. Actually, his clairvoyance activated, earning him the nickname the Sleeping Magus. So, Waver was already used to it. This guy would usually wake up on his own after half an hour, and during that time, he only needed to take a simple look after him. Taking off his own coat, Waver draped it over his disciple. Waver Velvet walked to the windowsill, looking at the clear sky outside London, silently lighting a new cigar. Legend has it that the son of the White Dragon pulled out the sword in the stone before King Arthur did, but abandoned it without a second thought. If the truth is as shocking as that, it's no wonder the Anglo-Saxons, who occupied the nest, wanted to bury this history in the dust. Unfortunately, whatever Waver said at this point, his disciple couldn't hear. In the eerie space filled with a pervasive grey mist. Looking at the translucent panel in front of him with the words "Please draw your initial talent," Reinhard was momentarily ecstatic. Finally! Finally! Help to live in this rabbit hole arrived. Although all this time he may have appeared calm and collected as if everything was under his control, only he knows how much blood and tears he has shed to find a way out of this rabbit hole. Imagine watching the world come to an end in a few decades. If not for the help of his Magecraft, he might have gone crazy and committed suicide. It's just that. No. There is no need to think about it, since it is in the past. Now it is better to focus on the thing in front of him at the moment. Reinhard took a deep breath, finally calming his thoughts a bit, and began to examine the panel in front of him. Draw your initial talent. It looks like some kind of simulator system. This type of system often has a big gap between upper and lower limits, and the cost of simulation is not clear for now. So, system? Can you respond? As the words fell silent. With Reinhardt's inquiry, the panel in front of him did indeed refresh with new content. The Antagonist simulator is at your service. The Antagonist simulator is dedicated to assisting you in becoming the ultimate antagonist. If you are satisfied with its use, do not forget to give it a 5-star rating. Please draw your initial talent. Very well. Being able to communicate smoothly with the system is undoubtedly good news. But, the slogan of this simulator made Reinhardt somewhat speechless. To assist in becoming the ultimate antagonist? It sounds like a morally corrupt and twisted kind of thing, like posting explicit pictures without revealing the source. Unfortunately, even though Reinhard, as an Isekai'd victim, is quite obsessed with the mysteries of Magecraft, he is still deeply concerned about the future of humanity. Despite his love for games with graphics content warning, he's not to the point of being considered a criminal. He may be a bit too immersed in this type games, but it's not to the extent of actually being considered a criminal. He thought it might not really fit the position of the ultimate antagonist with such a humble and down-to-earth background. However, as these thoughts emerged in his mind, as if sensing Reinhardt's thoughts, the panel in front of him instantly displayed a corresponding response. Not so. Host, you undoubtedly possess a strong motivation, clear plans, firm will, undisclosed secrets, outstanding execution, remarkable personality charm, and the determination to subvert the world. Undoubtedly, you are the perfect candidate for the ultimate antagonist. Ha! Reinhard carefully thought about it and realized. I see, it makes sense. I can't argue with that. Firstly, strong motivation. Reinhard wants to survive this rabbit hole, that's motivation enough. He can accept his own death, but if there's a chance to fight for survival, why not go all out? Secondly, undisclosed secrets? How can he tell the clock tower, a bunch of eccentric magus, that the world is about to end? Should he write a report and drop it in the dean's mailbox? Reinhard is well aware that if he publicly propagates the theory of the end of the world on a large scale, some people in the council may unexpectedly be overjoyed. Having an excuse to send him to the ceiling designated would be their prerogative. This is indeed a secret that cannot be disclosed. Lastly, determination to subvert the world? Damn, this moonlit world line is about to be stirred into chaos by warp storms. Rather than being trampled by those four shit and their desecrated things, it's better to overturn it himself. Leading humanity to directly ascend the technological tree of psychic energy, breaking out of the earth and venturing into the universe. If one day he touches that route, maybe he can really do such a thing. In short. After saying so much, Reinhard actually realized. Yes, these are the excellent qualities often found in the villains of various works. It seems like, he has become a complete set. Ah, this is. Whether it's the reputation of the clock tower or the system statement, suddenly being designated as the ultimate antagonist, Reinhard didn't know whether to be happy or sigh. Although he was very curious about the origin of this simulator, he didn't think too much about things that were out of his control at the moment. It would only confuse him, and hinder the immediate goal he could achieve. Since answering his own introduction, the system has been urging him to start the simulation, and asking about anything else just repeats activation pending, seeming not very intelligent. Well, let's see what this simulation is about, everyone. This thing doesn't seem to have any other usable functions. Thinking like this, Reinhard, with the trial and error mentality, chose to draw his initial talent. If this system is useful, everyone is happy. But if it's this system and it's really not good, then he can only keep beating it until it becomes useful. Is the system such an inconvenient thing? It still needs the host himself to give it a good adjustment. Reinhard didn't know if the system could perceive these thoughts, but it seemed that its loading speed had increased. Initiating the extraction of initial talents. 1%, 10%, 100%, 1000%, breaking the limit. The extraction of initial talents is complete. Ready for the first simulation, please draw your initial talent. First, Dark Will, a profound dark will, representing your unwavering determination and resolution. For the goals you want to achieve, you will face your desires candidly, without hesitation to pay any price, even your own life can be used as a bargaining chip. In the raging waves, there is neither joy nor fear. You have near immunity to interference on the spiritual side. Dark Will? So the point is, immunity to mental interference, that's very useful here. Thinking like this, Reinhard soon saw the second talent refreshing on the panel. 2. Ultimate life form, born from the phantasmal species blood, you, who grows steadily every day, are advancing steadily into the realm of the ultimate life form. Your various basic attributes, the quality of your magic circuits, and your magical energy will continuously improve as you age, and all special attack effects will weaken against you. Cars? But this seems different. But he must say, this talent is indeed very strong, obviously to the point of being abnormal. And wouldn't he unlock an ending like being thrown into space and finally giving up thinking? 3. Peaceful life, you long for a peaceful life, not clinging to victory or defeat, nor entangled in troubles. Your nature is chaotic and evil, but the humble and gentle shell has become the perfect disguise for your daily life. When the moment comes to break this peaceful time, you will burst out an unprecedented terrifying execution power. In intense conflicts, your growth rate will greatly increase, making it easier to achieve breakthroughs and skills. With the third talent displayed, Reinhard was already too tired to complain. Dark Will, Ultimate Life Form, Peaceful Life. These attributes stacked together made Reinhard's mind short-circuit briefly to bring up strange images that he didn't know whether to say or not. Tisk. What kind of strange antagonist character is this? Bad news, this is a stitched-up monster. Good news, it's all stitched up. Just as this thought emerged in his mind, Reinhard's vision suddenly went black. Only the cold voice of the system slowly echoed in his ears. Talent import complete. Beginning module loading, Remnants of the Age of Gods. Chapter 4 Afraid of Domestic Violence. You are born, as ultimate life form. It seems you were born into a prestigious noble family, a non-human creation born from the divine phantasmal species blood. Instead of the warm cradle and parental care, what greeted your birth was the cold ground and a gaze filled with complex emotions. It actually succeeded. The flickering candle light cast a dim light. The inverted iron thorn chandelier swayed slightly above. In the hidden underground chamber of the castle, a glamorous woman with blue lipstick looked at the newborn in the magic circle. Under the black veil, her expression seemed a bit complicated. I can't believe it really worked. Born, and then what? She had never taken care of a child before. So quiet. Is it because it's an artificial being and doesn't know how to cry? The glamorous woman approached with some restraint. In the eyes of the witch, the lack of crying from the baby in the magic circle was meaningful. Instead of crying, the infant with deep grey eyes seemed to be looking at itself with great curiosity. Being observed by her creation. This feeling was indeed somewhat strange. It seems like he's quite close to you, Morgan. A tall and burly old man emerged from the shadows, appearing behind the glamorous woman without a sound, his movements as mysterious as a ghost. Is it because he caught a glimpse of a beautiful witch, forgetting even to cry? Watching this scene, the old man couldn't help but laugh, clapping his hands. Good lad, truly my blood. This joke is not funny, Vortigern. Morgan, the glamorous woman, slightly narrowed her blue eyes. He is born from British divine phantasmal species blood. There is no need for ordinary infant-like weakness and crying. Please, don't confine my creation with the common sense of the mundane world. The British witch said indifferently. He's your creation, but he's also my son. Looking at the silver-haired baby in the magic circle, the old man's face revealed a gentle expression. He casually tore off his robe and wrapped it into a swaddle, carefully cradling the baby in his arms. Lowering his gaze, he stared at the infant in his arms. Vortigern's lips involuntarily curved into a gentle smile, and his originally sharp gaze softened. Incredible, this guy can actually show such an expression. Watching this harmonious scene of father and son, Morgan's gaze seemed to be frozen. Unusual, too unusual. The white dragon that devoured light, the despicable king who stole Britain, King Vortigern. His infamous name was known far and wide in this land. According to the rumors among the British people, Vortigern was a ruthless and tyrannical overlord, and his notorious name silenced the cries of babies in the night. Could the word gentle be associated with this guy? Just imagining such a scene felt like experiencing confusion in the nerves. Could a dragon actually smile? It was terrifying. Ignoring the shocked expression on the witch's face. Looking at the silver-haired baby in the swaddle, staring curiously at him. Vortigern faintly felt the implicit connection and bond between them. There was no doubt. Even if he was a genuine artificial being, he was still his own offspring. Even if he were to die one day, his blood would still flow in the world, like an extension of his own hands. Family ties. What a strange feeling. It seems that being a parent feels like this. With lowered iron-grey pupils. The old man's tone was filled with a mix of emotions. To be honest, I'm starting to regret a bit, letting this child be born into this world. As my offspring, his life is destined not to end well. Maybe he will have a regrettable ending, full of unfulfilled outcomes. Hey, Vortigern. Can't you say something nice with that your mouth? Morgan, who heard this, was quite displeased. What kind of words were these? Wasn't he prematurely deflating the atmosphere before the battle even began? This is my painstakingly crafted masterpiece, the ultimate creation to counter that imitation. The son of the White Dragon, born from the British phantasmal species blood, is the lingering twilight in the declining era of the Age of Gods. Forget about that Red Dragon. Even you might not surpass the growing power of him. Aren't you questioning my skills? This time, we've truly created a formidable monster. Saying this, the British witch, Morgan, with her enchanting and glamorous face, revealed a cold smile named hatred. Morgan almost ground her teeth in frustration. What was he saying? Wasn't half the battle power leaked before the fight even started? This so-called monster, what if we release it? The witch's face, with a captivating and glamorous appearance, showed a smile filled with mockery. But, even if we release a monster, so what? My dear king, together with Merlin, created the Red Dragon's son, a non-human creation, and then attempted to let that laughable tool rule Britain, taking away the throne that originally belonged to me. So, I'm going to do the same, creating a White Dragon's son to crush him underfoot. If Merlin can do it, why can't I? Saying so, Morgan gazed sharply at Vortigern. Back then, when you heard my thoughts, you praised me and expressed strong support. You even provided your precious white dragon blood as material. But now, even before a confrontation, you have this defeated tone. Could it be that you're afraid of the Red Dragon's power, so you want to back out? Hat. Vortigern, it seems your caliber is just this much. Morgan's sharp words were quite offensive. Unfortunately, for a character like Vortigern, it seemed that he couldn't break through the latter's defense. Scared? The old man looked sideways at his niece, his expression somewhat ironic. Even if Uther and Merlin were stacked together, they wouldn't be my opponents. You want a tool created from the heart of a red dragon to come and attack me? It's laughable. It seemed that through the dark veil, the witch's expression could be seen. Vortigern stared at Morgan, speaking meaningfully. I'm not questioning your skills. Rather, it seems that you're the one who is truly afraid. When you learned of the birth of the Red Dragon's son, you hurriedly came to me like this, Morgan. You fear that your newborn sister will truly grow into a ruler worthy of Britain. The people's support for her will turn your righteous indignation into an ugly, impotent rage. So, you want to prove it to Uther, don't you? To make him understand how absurd his decision is. Morgan, you may also be betraying your own country. You. Morgan's thin lips trembled for a moment. Ugh. There's no way to refute Vortigern at all. Every word was like a pearl, each sentence cutting straight to the heart. It felt like her defenses were about to be completely shattered. Facing the provocation from the witch, Vortigern remained unmoved. Instead, his words, designed to pierce her heart, struck directly at Morgan, leaving her defenseless. Watching his niece's almost broken expression, the elderly king shook his head, not bothering to argue with this young witch. Lowering his iron-grey eyes, he looked at the silver-haired baby in his arms. Vortigern's expression seemed somewhat trance-like. I naturally don't fear the so-called Red Dragon. However, is my only enemy a trivial red dragon? On the candlestick, the flames flickered. The fire swayed in the dimness, struggling to burn but unable to dispel the vast twilight. The night was still very long. But the lamp oil seemed to be running out soon. Standing amidst this swaying and uncertain residual fire, the old man spoke softly. My enemy, Vortigern, is the entire era of Britain. Time and space are the same power, heroes are not free from fate. The decline of the Age of Gods is the trend, and thus, the fortunes of the entire era will be aligned with the Red Dragon in this torrent. If he is to inherit my path, the child's future will undoubtedly be extremely difficult. And the endpoint of this path is only a steep cliff. Now, facing the fading Britain of true ether, there is no vast land for him to roam. So, I do not fear the Red Dragon, but I worry about his fate. Perhaps it's because of this concern that my heart cannot become hard enough. Undoubtedly, I have added, a weakness. Another gentle smile, accompanied by sighs and emotions. In the 6 months they had spent together, Morgan was seeing this side of the elderly king for the first time, so full of sorrows and sensitivities. The devourer of light, White Dragon. He was almost turning into a holy dragon. It seemed like he had become 10 times darker and 3 times whiter. It looked like one should never have children, it would make a person unfortunate. Looking at the complex emotions in the eyes of the old king, Morgan came to a very reasonable conclusion. Perhaps this was the unique sensitivity of the old man, she couldn't understand it at all. So, for the former's concerns, the witch just shook her head with a mocking expression. It's a pity that, as the son of the White Dragon from the lingering twilight age of gods, he is destined to contend with the Red Dragon. Are you afraid, by any chance, of losing him? After a moment of silence, Vortigern remained non-committal. Perhaps. Tisk. This ambiguous answer made Morgan couldn't help but sneer. The so-called King Vortigern, known as the White Dragon, would actually care about the life and death of a tool? Incredible. Once. Vortigern gently shook his head. I thought I wouldn't care. Unfortunately, living in this world means having weaknesses, Morgan. The old man smiled, pointing to his chest, all those indifferent words are just used to deceive one's own heart. I didn't expect you, uncle, to still be someone who values family so much. The witch sneered and mocked, you're the one who fits the saying brothers and siblings are respectful. Vortigern burst into laughter. Thanks to you for still being willing to call me uncle, good niece. Watching the bickering between the old and the young. At this moment, Reinhard was thinking. This old man and witch, could they be his parents from the simulation this time? Stop quarreling, how about you guys have a fight? Chapter 5 The Witch and the Monster. Speaking of which, Reinhard suddenly remembered this simulation. It seems that he has the setting of being an artificial human or maybe a homunculus if using the moonlit world interpretation. So, these two should be his foster parents? Is the age gap a bit too big? And moreover, it's even an uncle and niece relationship. Reinhard understood, the noble relationships in feudal times were often chaotic, and chaos was considered normal. Especially in Great Britain, it historically produced a lot of family dramas, right? Hemophilia was spread by these nobles, and they even called it the noble disease. It was really quite ridiculous. After listening for so long, Reinhard basically understood. After touching that piece of dragon scale, he seemed to be simulated as the ill-fated son of the White Dragon? Shouldn't it be said that it truly lives up to the title of an antagonist simulator? Am I really the antagonist? The way the system assisted him in becoming the ultimate antagonist was to personally experience being a despised and hated big villain. One had to admit that the system understood the principle of unity of knowledge and action. Once involved in such a setting, it's challenging to say that one's character won't be influenced during the simulation. After all, a person's personality is largely shaped by their environment. And according to the common nature of simulators, one's actions in the simulation might even affect reality. Similar settings had been explored quite a bit. This brought about a very interesting question. Since relics like the son of the White Dragon had appeared in later generations, it indicated that the history had become established. Then, how should the cause and effect of his actions in the simulation, if later discovered to be part of future history, be defined? Was it that he left the relic of the son of the White Dragon behind? Or did the relic make him simulate as the son of the White Dragon? If the historical facts were established, wouldn't it mean that all his actions were predetermined? In other words, free will. Does his existence truly embody the concept of free will? Just thinking about it was quite terrifying. But, what does it have to do with him? Facing such a classic time-space paradox, Reinhard chose to address it directly. After all, he came to experience the benefits of a system, not to become a philosopher. Even if it's predestined, so what? Reinhard didn't care whether he was some manipulated puppet or not. Knowing it wouldn't change anything, and now, he still lacked the capital to arm wrestle at that level. People who have walked on the edge of a cliff will cherish the present even more. Diagnosed with a terminal illness in the past, he saw things very clearly. Reinhard is Reinhard, just an ordinary person struggling to survive. That's enough. Even if his life is a piece of music, a script, or a novel. He has his way of advancing the story. Leave the philosophical pondering to the barrage and the comments. Thinking like this, Reinhard no longer tangled with paradoxes and causality but subconsciously shifted his gaze back to the witch. His convenient old man was right. This witch's is indeed eye-catching. Perhaps it's due to the blessing of divine phantasmal species lineage, making Morgan's magical veil ineffective in concealing anything from Reinhard. So, he discovered that his witch cousin completely had a face like Saber. Although lacking that iconic ahogue. But compared to the determination of the King of Knights, the corners of this witch's eyes and eyebrows appeared more gentle and charming. The cobalt-colored lip color and eyeshadow added a touch of enchanting charm, making her more alluring. And even though it was the medieval period, this witch was wearing a cool navel-revealing outfit and sexy garter stockings. Between the slits of her skirt, the slightly tightened absolute area was almost like breaking the rules. Simply put, it's very provocative, extremely seductive, and quite entertaining. Seems to be called Morgan? The illustration looks so good, but she's quite an unimpressive character, hey? Although he didn't play the game, he did have examples to compare from some images and wikis he had read such as Jean, MASH, Mysterious Heroine X, and Grey. Reinhard also knows that this face has long been a scenic spot in the moonlit world. Morgan's dad can even form a basketball team with them. For Reinhard, a casual audience who has only seen a few anime series, his knowledge of the Arthurian legend is only superficial, at best. After all, who has the time to read this legends while still sick? So when he heard Morgan and Vortigern's names and the content of the struggle between the Red Dragon and the White Dragon, he had no concept of it at the moment. At this moment, he was simply appreciating the witch. Why does he keep staring at me? Morgan felt a bit uncomfortable being stared at. There shouldn't be anything on me that a child would like. Perhaps it comes from your creation, born with an affinity for you, Vortigern smiled. Since you have this bond with the creation, do you want to name your masterpiece? Naming? I'm not good at that kind of thing. Morgan shook her head awkwardly, immediately expressing her refusal. The calamity of Britannia. Monster among monsters. Sly and cunning witch. Unfortunate existence. Having endured various malicious nicknames since childhood, she had no confidence in her ability to name herself. Let me do it, after all, he is my son. Vortigern lowered his gaze, looking at the silver-haired baby in the cradle. The two pairs of iron-grey eyes met, and the flickering candlelight reflected in both pairs of pupils. Your name is Alvin. Reinhard heard the old man say softly. Alvin Pendragon. Meaning beloved person. As the words fell silent, Morgan, who was on the side, couldn't help but fall silent for a moment. As the son of the White Dragon, Morgan murmured, wanting to be welcomed by the people is like a fairy tale. Just hope, Vortigern smiled, that he won't be cursed like me. Although he said that, both of them knew that the phrase beloved person was almost ironic for the son of the White Dragon. The scene fell into a silent silence. It seemed to foresee the thorny path ahead for this child. Morgan couldn't help but think of her gloomy past. Yes, just like the cursed King Vortigern, she, who was cast as a witch, was never a beloved person. As the noble daughter of King Uther. The mystery that should have been cut off in the previous generation unexpectedly reappeared in Morgan. The extraordinary talent seemed like a gift from the gods, giving her powerful magecraft. But in Morgan's eyes, this was more like a curse that was completely opposite to King Uther's glory. From then on, she embarked on an unfortunate life that was feared by others. In her childhood, uncontrollable dark magecraft inadvertently caused crops to wither and vegetation to dry up. The overflowing magic energy enveloped Morgan in a mysterious shadow, making her existence like a plague, quickly drawing people's hatred. So Morgan put on a black veil to cover her face, closed herself off in her room, and tried to master her powers, hoping to be welcomed by everyone someday. Unfortunately, the girl named Morgan Le Fay later realized. It wasn't because she did something wrong that she was hated. It was because she was hated that everything she did was wrong. As a stepdaughter, she was initially not trusted by her father. So when she awakened such dark magical talent, King Uther's aversion became even more apparent. The girl named Morgan Le Fay had never been loved. Because she was unloved, everything she did was wrong. Wanting to gain King Uther's approval, she was ruthlessly abandoned as a spare tire. Wanting to be welcomed by the people, she was shunned as a witch to be avoided. Clearly not understanding herself, merely through hearsay, one could know how scheming and cunning Morgan Le Fay was. Perhaps the reason why King Uther lost to that king is because Morgan, that cunning witch, played a role in it. Ha 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 ha. If that's the case, then he will comply with their expectations and truly become a mysterious and ominous existence like a witch, and go to assist Vortigern. But is someone born to be a mysterious witch? Will his innocent creation have to endure the same fate as herself? Why? Looking at the silver-haired baby curiously examining her, the iron-grey translucent eyes seemed to be filled with the joy unique to children. He really feels very close to her. In a daze, Morgan seemed to understand Vortigern's feelings a bit. Anger surged within her heart in an instant, followed by questioning. Finally, unwillingness. There's no way to accept it. Even less tolerable to endure the repetition of the same misfortune. So, let me teach him. The cold voice sounded like a flickering candle in the twilight. In this dim underground chamber, Morgan spoke softly. As the son of divine phantasmal species, his talent is undoubtedly monstrous. In the realm of Magecraft, perhaps I can offer some guidance. Good. Vortigern nodded. Thank you for your trouble. Do you trust me so easily? Vortigern's unhesitating attitude made Morgan feel uncomfortable instead. Aren't you worried that I'll corrupt your good son? Corrupt? Hee. The burly old man raised his hand, pointing to his own face, looking somewhat amused. Within this Britannia, is there anyone more corrupt than King Vortigern? You have a point. The Blue Witch chuckled self-mockingly, shaking her head. Slowly, she walked forward and received her creation from Vortigern's hands. The silver-haired baby in the cradle continued to gaze at her. In those iron-grey pupils, Morgan saw her own slightly nervous face. Could it be that he's so close to her, an ominous witch like herself? Really? It's not something good for you. Alvin. If no one expects your birth, then, let this ominous witch give you care. In the dim firelight, the witch hugged her own monster. Chapter 6 Alvin Pendragon. Under Morgan's guidance and care, you began a peaceful upbringing within King Vortigern's castle. Talent ultimate life form awakened, you are the ultimate life form, gathering the blood of the Britannian phantasmal species. As you age, your attributes, the quality of magic circuits, and your affinity for magic will spontaneously improve. The perfect ultimate life form has no weaknesses, thus all special attack effects are weakened against you. As you gradually grow, the maturity and astonishing intelligence you display far surpass your peers, leaving even Morgan amazed. Like a waterlogged sponge, you absorb madly the Magecraft knowledge she imparts to you. Various ingenious ideas based on modern Magecraft thinking also benefit Morgan greatly. Due to the decline of the Age of Gods, the true ether of Britannia is gradually diminishing. Therefore, future Magecraft construction must focus on the efficient use of magical energy and seek miniaturization, refinement, and engraving of Magecraft. A forward-thinking idea, Alvin. In the luxurious bedroom of the castle, adorned with dazzling crystal chandeliers and smooth porcelain tiles, a slightly immature yet handsome silver-haired young man stood before the veiled witch. In the palm of his hand, he held a constantly changing shadow, taking various forms. Mana burst, your attribute has awakened. Morgan stared at the dark magic in the young man's hand, somewhat mesmerized. A scene with a strong sense of déjà vu. It's almost identical to her past. Is it a coincidence? Morgan murmured softly to herself, it's the ominous shadow. Ominous? Why would you say that? The silver-haired youth asked with curiosity. I think magical attributes have no distinction of superiority, it's only a matter of application. Morgan, upon hearing this, shook her head expressionlessly. A magic attribute similar to mine is not a good thing, Alvin. Human nature tends toward light and fears the shadows. Essentially, they all fear the unknown. Therefore, to the public, unseeable shadows symbolize ominous disaster. Explaining that magical attributes are without distinction is useless, people will instinctively vote. A commoner without guilt can bear the sins of the mighty. She has already proven this with her unfortunate experience. Not a good thing. However, precisely because I awakened the same attribute as you, I feel especially happy. Morgan was startled. Why? Because this darkness makes me feel like I'm close to you at all times. As the words fell, the Bretonnian witch seemed a bit dazed. The noonday sun cast its brilliance through the window grills, painting a layer of dazzling color on the contours of the youth in this luxurious bedroom. Through the black veil, Morgan gazed at the warm smile on the silver-haired youth's face, radiant like the warm sunlight in winter, a sunlight that the dark witch had never bathed in. Strange. So strange. Why would someone be so gentle to an ominous witch? She should distance herself, communicate in the coldest tone. Dislike, resentment, avoidance, disdain. That would be appropriate. Incomprehensible. Incomprehensible. The witch named Morgan Le Fay has never experienced someone being so close to her in her life. In those clear eyes, there is no trace of disgust, disdain, or mockery, only unreserved, sincere warmth from the heart. The sincerity that the dark witch finds difficult to face. Heartbeat is so fast. Don't know how to respond to this palpitation. It feels as if a strange, sticky liquid is flowing out of her body, making her chest feel uncomfortable. Morgan looked away in confusion, not daring to look at the young silver-haired man's face again. Today's lesson ends here, Alvin. I need to study the magical miniaturization concept you proposed. From now on, you should practice on your own, remember not to be lazy. Almost as if fleeing for her life. The witch, with a blush on her face, hurriedly walked out of the bedroom, unable to face her disciple. Watching Morgan's disheveled steps disappear behind the palace door, Reinhard clicked his tongue and slowly withdrew his gaze. Cute when being tsundere. Really can't resist the charm of a tsundere witch. It appears even more adorable. Although the attribute of tsundere has already faded in the modern era. But now is the medieval period, and it still belongs to the ultimate version of tsundere. So, Morgan is the number one. Unfortunately, despite the relationship and the fact of teaching, Morgan does not allow Reinhard to address her as a sister or teacher, emphasizing that calling her by her name is enough. Perhaps this is a unique reserve of witches, attempting to achieve alienation through this method. Her tsundere nature is evident. But Reinhard insists on using honorifics, and Morgan, unable to resist, allows him to do so. After 8 years of daily companionship, Reinhard has already thoroughly understood the temper of this witch. In summary, tsundere and lacking love. Through the fragments between the lines of their usual conversations, one can glimpse her heart-wrenching past, which is known as beautiful and strong but miserable, right? Not to mention, the veil, crop top, suspenders. The witch's epic-making aesthetics hit Reinhardt's preferences head-on. Black stockings are a good civilization. Although it is tempting to complain about where suspenders came from in the medieval period, Morgan's thighs peeking out from under the skirt often distract Reinhardt's attention. But, when it comes to a beautiful girl, things don't need to be so clear. Wait a minute. Is this witch really a girl? Although it's not convenient to ask a witch's age, judging from the age of his cheap old man Vortigern, Morgan should be in her 40s at least. Isn't this just a pure big age, pure and innocent beautiful woman? With this in mind, it suddenly feels more alluring. To go big, go all the way. Facing the temptation from a shota, it's easy to be at a loss, so cute. Reinhard can naturally see the turmoil in Morgan's heart. Like the way her thighs touched upon Reinhardt's preferences, the younger is also the ultimate good ball zone for the older beautiful woman. Perhaps because his face has provided some assist bonus? Thinking like this, Reinhard couldn't help but look at the full-length mirror placed in the bedroom. In the mirror, the slightly immature but already handsome silver-haired young man tilted his gaze, facing each other. The skin is delicate and fair, almost comparable to that of a newborn baby. Feather-like eyelashes half cover the ash-gray eyes, and the dazzling irises seem to have continuous patterns radiating within them. If someone were to gaze directly into the youth's pupils under sunlight, they would discover that there seemed to be exotic feathered flowers slowly blooming within. In simple terms, he looks very handsome and is highly relatable. If Reinhard himself were a fan of younger individuals, he would undoubtedly find it challenging to resist such a beautiful and youthful face. After all, as the foundational character for the ultimate antagonist, he was quite reliable in terms of charm. Looking at this face, which could exceeded his own appearance in his previous life, Reinhard felt very satisfied. Since the start of this simulation, he had transformed from a newborn baby into the silver-haired youth he is today. Even though it could be said that he had changed bodies, manipulating it didn't feel cumbersome at all. It was as if he was using his original body, smooth and seamless. Although it was just a few simple summaries in the simulation, it felt as if he had genuinely experienced the time from birth until now. Those childhood scenes were still vivid in Reinhard's mind. Perhaps due to the simulator's effect, this new life did not mix with the original memories. The days of the youth were neatly stored in the palace of his thoughts, like books ready for him to read at any time. He was still Reinhard, without a doubt. However, in this simulated scenario, his current name was Alvin Pendragon. So let's start calling him Alvin for now, to avoid any confusion. He was the only son of the notorious King Vortigern, the evil ruler reigning over present-day Great Britain. His birth remained unknown to the world because, in today's Great Britain, Vortigern was the ultimate villain, despised by everyone. The despicable king, referred to as the vile king, was a well-known derogatory term. He introduced the Saxons, savages, who invaded the homes of the Celtic people, instigating a rebellion and seizing the throne from his own brother. The crimes committed by this vile king were numerous and could hardly be listed. He deserved the death penalty. Therefore, for Alvin, the son of the White Dragon, there was no chance of having a good reputation. Once it was known that he was Vortigern's offspring, he would inevitably be labeled as a major villain, essentially starting with full hatred in a hellish scenario. Looking at the fortress city of Londinium outside the window, the vast and majestic buildings surrounding the castle were no less magnificent than any famous landmarks in the future. Alvin was quite impressed by the grandeur of this landscape. During his studies at the clock tower, he had been racing against time and didn't have the leisure for tourism. He wondered if he would have the chance to see the ruins of this city in the future. The Britain in the 5th century. After these 8 years, Alvin naturally already knew what era he was in now in the moonlit world, and he understood who his destined opponent was. Merlin, King Uther's court magus, made a prophecy 3 years ago. Uther's successor has been chosen, and the son of the Red Dragon of Britain will inevitably pull out the sword of selection, leading the gathered knights of the Round Table to overthrow the cruel rule of the vile king. This explosive news spread like wildfire, causing today's Great Britain to boil like a hot porridge. Everyone hoped that they were the savior knight, who would wield the sword of selection, defeat the evil King Vortigern, and restore clarity to Britannia. Alvin, as the son of the White Dragon, was the villain who would be defeated. And the enemy he was about to face was naturally the destined Red Dragon's son, King Arthur. Or rather, the more familiar name, Artoria Pendragon. How did he, a common passerby and a mediocre magus, end up becoming the fallen soul beneath Saber's sword? But looking at his character panel, Alvin understood that he might not necessarily lose. Name, Alvin Pendragon. Strength, B+. Endurance, C. Agility, B. Mana, B. Luck, E. Noble Phantasm. Magic Resistance, B. The divine phantasmal species blood has manifested in you. Without the release of modern Magecraft using true ether, it is challenging to have any effect on you. Writing, A. Learned exceptional writing skills through a combination of modern knowledge and the divine phantasmal species blood. Whether it's modern vehicles, magical beasts, or phantasmal species, you can easily control them. Mana Burst, Shadow B. A skill that strengthens weapons and the body by releasing mana. Due to its nature, you can easily manipulate shadows. Using this skill during the day will increase consumption, making nighttime battles more advantageous for you. Attacks made through flowing shadows, as a medium, are not only silent but also pervasive. Brute Strength, B. Basic ability of possessing the phantasmal species blood, a skill that enhances one's strength. Even in the juvenile stage, you already possess considerable brute strength. Beautiful Youth, A. A lovable, beautiful youth. This face naturally evokes goodwill from both men and women, bordering on the realm of charm. Unfortunately, if people know your true identity as the son of the White Dragon, even the most handsome face won't counteract the inherent aversion. This skill may undergo a transformation after you reach adulthood. Dark Will, Not Awakened. Upon this pitch-black, desolate wilderness, you seem to have not found your path yet. Ultimate Life Form, B. The juvenile ultimate life form has already shown its formidable appearance. As you age, all your attributes will continue to improve. Peaceful Life, E. You fully enjoy the current peaceful life, but your true potential can only be unlocked when in the midst of turmoil. Chapter 7 This vast land. The facade of the ultimate antagonist is quite impressive. Alvin browsed through his attributes, and Alvin's current panel was no less impressive than a slightly weaker servant in the Holy Grail War. Although, he knew that in the moonlit world, the panel was basically just for show, the noble phantasms were the key to determining victory. In actual battles, everyone would release chaotic magical attacks, creating explosions of gas. However, this panel was already extremely exaggerated. It's worth noting that Alvin is just an 8-year-old Shota. He could be described as a young dragon man, capable of carrying weights and punching through stones. Even those long-established knights would exclaim upon seeing him, "This kid is only 8." With the ultimate life form talent, his phantasmal species blood granted Alvin literal strength of bears, eagle eyes, leopard speed, wolf ears, not referencing ordinary animals, but using phantasmal species from the Age of Gods as a standard. All the superior characteristics of various species converged into one, and he could even develop a pair of wings if he wanted. No need for any rigorous training, practice, or study, as long as he kept breathing, he would continually become stronger. This was the superiority of being the ultimate life form, every moment was a continuous step towards the realm called perfection. With age, Alvin still had vast room for improvement, truly embodying a promising future. When he reached adulthood, he would undoubtedly grow into a monster with strength and agility both at A, or maybe even 4A+. However, compared to the luxurious terms around him on the panel, one line on the panel seemed a bit out of place. Luck, E. Tisk. Alvin looked at that glaring item, it's actually E rank. Is this implying I should become a lancer? It had to be said, his system truly understood the antagonist. If luck were good, then he wouldn't be an antagonist but the protagonist. Thinking this way, the silver-haired youth couldn't help lowering his gaze and looking at the vast training ground at the base of the castle. Although swordsmanship was more in line with Alvin's aesthetic. But it seemed like the system was hinting for him to learn the spear. In this dilemma, a tall figure appeared behind Alvin, accompanied by the warm voice of an old man. A rough hand, covered in scars and calluses, gently pressed on the young man's shoulder. "Alvin, you seem distracted." "Father." Alvin didn't need to turn around to know it was his old man, Vortigern. Even with senses as alert as a jackal, he hadn't noticed Vortigern's approach. The strengths of the two sides were obviously not on the same level. He turned around and looked at the burly old man in front of him. What entered his eyes was the gentle smile on Vortigern's face. Ignoring his overly tall stature, the despised king who made the entire Britannia tremble seemed like an ordinary and amiable neighbor at the moment. If an outsider saw this scene, no one would believe that the seemingly friendly old man in front of the youth was the terrifying vile king who made the entire Britain tremble. Only in front of his own son. This king, who was pointed at by thousands, concealed all his sharpness. Facing his silver-haired old man, Alvin nodded slightly in greeting. "I was looking at the scenery outside the window." "Something on your mind?" "I've encountered a little bottleneck in my magical studies," Alvin said straightforwardly, "and Lady Morgan seems to be distancing herself from me." "Your cousin has that kind of personality, you should be more tolerant of her." Vortigern smiled. "Tomorrow is your 8th birthday, do you have any gifts you want? As long as it exists on this Britannia, feel free to ask. Even the stars in the sky, I'll pluck them for you." The old man said exaggerated words with a gentle tone that contradicted them. The idea of plucking stars sounded extravagant. But Alvin knew that Vortigern could really do it. The despised King Vortigern had ruled over the central city of Londinium for nearly a decade. The brightest jewel of Britannia had fallen into the hands of Vortigern, and the capital had succumbed to the barbarian rebels, a great shame for the Celtic people. Despite the widespread condemnation and curses, over the years no lord or knight dared to truly show up for retribution against Vortigern, demonstrating the terrifying reputation he had earned. In addition, what is even more intriguing is, Alvin is not clear about what force is supporting this elderly king, who willingly faces the world's criticism, bears the 1,000-year-old infamy, and introduces barbarians to usurp the throne from his own brother. Uther is not even a match for Vortigern. If Vortigern is truly a vile king seeking power, why wait until this late, decrepit age to rebel? After many years of acquaintance, Alvin naturally sees that Vortigern, denounced as a dragon, has no craving for power whatsoever. No interest in women, no love for wealth, no desire for authority. Despite leading a foreign army, there is a strict military discipline, more like driving celts away than conquering cities. No interest in bloody massacres, the word cruel doesn't suit him. There is no motive for revenge either. Then, what is he persisting for? Unfortunately, no matter how directly or indirectly Alvin has asked about it, Vortigern never answers. He just smiles and ruffles Alvin's hair. You'll understand when you grow up, Alvin. He always says. Will time provide the answers? Time. There is nothing more cruel in this world than time. Even the light-devouring dragon has to be tainted by the decay of aging under the river of time. Vortigern Pendragon. This man is quite old. The wrinkles on his face, scars on his arms, white hair, cloudy pupils. These traces left by time reveal all the hardships the old man has experienced. However, the imposing aura lurking in his sturdy body remains as deep as a prison. Facing this aged king, Alvin feels like he's facing towering mountains, making it impossible to stir any emotion. A character as profound as the earth. This is Alvin's evaluation of Vortigern. As for his father's inquiry, the silver-haired youth just gently shook his head. I don't want any gifts, Alvin paused, but I have a few presumptuous thoughts and would like to request father's permission. But feel free to speak. I want to go out and see the world, and also practice combat. As the words fell silent, the old man entered a momentary silence. After rubbing his son's head, Vortigern looked out of the window and slowly spoke. When you were young, your body hadn't fully grown, and practicing combat would easily hurt your bones and tendons. Now that you're at this age, you have a suitable physique. I have no objection to this matter. But, Alvin, if you are to go out. The words of the king gradually extinguished like dying embers. However, Alvin had already understood what his father wanted to say. His identity is just too sensitive. The son of King Vortigern, this identity, if accidentally exposed, would immediately attract a large number of knights for assassination. Despite the knights advocating single combat duels, when facing demons like the White Dragon, there would be no talk of chivalry. Vortigern couldn't always protect him. Sending an army for protection would be an inappropriate display. So for 8 years, Alvin had never set foot outside the castle. Sorry, I haven't been able to let you go out. It's my fault. Although he was a lively young man, he had to be confined to the high tower of the castle. Even though he understood that this was necessary for his protection, Vortigern, as a father, couldn't help but feel guilty for his son. Therefore, despite the danger, he didn't immediately reject Alvin's request. At home, you have everything you want. Why suddenly want to go out? The old man wanted to hear his son's reasons. The silver-haired youth, hearing this, turned his gaze and looked at the vast land under the sun. His eyes did not linger within the magnificent city of Londinium but crossed over the towering walls, looking towards the distant horizon. With the sun hanging high, everything was flourishing. Everything in the world seemed to be thriving. Just like this cloudless and clear sky, the youth's heart could not be bound by anything. Without measuring this vast land with my own feet, I won't truly understand this country, right? Alvin spoke softly. I want to travel because I want to see the appearance of Britannia with my own eyes. Beloved by the age of gods, Britannia. Despite facing the decline of true ether, the magical energy in this land is still abundant. Like a mouse stealing into an oil drum, the high concentration of magic in the air is almost extravagant for Alvin, a modern magus relying on a small source for spells. The true ether-rich age of gods is right in front of him. Distribution of phantasmal species in Britannia, characteristics of plants and creatures, and the truth behind the decline of the age of gods. Alvin has too many topics he wants to study. Those various ideas in his mind are difficult to realize in the high tower of the castle. In the clock tower, he can't even touch the scenery of the age of gods. This rare opportunity should not be wasted. The other reason is that if this system were to make a sudden decision that everything that is currently happening is over and take him back to where he was before, there would be no pills for regret. Just as Alvin answered the questions, it was also his true thoughts. He never places hope on illusions. Therefore, Alvin, like a sponge soaked in water, greedily studies everything unknown. Perhaps the power of this body is just like a fleeting dream, but the knowledge and experience gained in the simulation are real. Not as a magus, but as a human, yearning to explore the mysterious unknown, that is a truly heartfelt impulse. Intellect. That is something that cannot be taken away by anyone, truly belonging to oneself. Looking at the silver-haired youth gazing out of the window with a somewhat trance-like expression, the hope in his eyes made Vortigern's expression bewildered for a moment. As a vile king, how could he not distinguish between sincerity and deceit in a person's words? Because of this, Vortigern knew, Alvin was sincere. To truly understand this country? As the king himself, he never thought about understanding this country. A ruler is a king. Almost all of his energy is occupied by the matter of the decline of the age of gods. Because of being too focused on this, Vortigern is oblivious to the land beneath his feet. In the end, as a king, his awareness is not even comparable to that of a child. How embarrassing! Faced with the silver-haired youth's resounding answer, Vortigern couldn't help but be a little stunned. Alvin's excellence far exceeded his expectations. But if his son is to embark on the treacherous path of protecting Britannia, what should he, as a father, do? The old man with one foot in the coffin shouldn't block the way. Leave it to the young people to decide. If you want to go out, go, Alvin. I believe you will handle it with discretion. The old man closed his iron-grey cloudy pupils. But before that, you need to earnestly learn means of self-defense. Remember, once the body dies, everything ends. As long as you're alive, anything is possible. Only by understanding the value of life can you have the determination to give up everything. Go and learn how to do your best to survive. This is the first lesson your father gives you. Chapter 8 You Can't Be This Cute. Your request to go out has finally received Vortigern's approval. For safety considerations, you quickly began learning various self-defense under Morgan's guidance. Theoretical knowledge and practical skills complement each other, and as shadow attribute magus of the same type, Morgan's adept use of shadow magecraft and exquisite skills have truly opened your eyes. Due to the affinity of magecraft for darkness, you often choose to learn magecraft in the garden under the night sky. Morgan's careful guidance leaves no reservation for you. Where there is light, there is also shadow. Where there is brightness, there is the birth of darkness. In the mysticism of magecraft, shadow usually symbolizes adversity, secrecy, and the concept of sleep. Therefore, Alvin, our attributes are naturally suited for stealth, but the specific application depends on each person's understanding. Next, carefully remember each step of my spell casting: deeper than the night, more elusive than a light feather, radiance and flames are the dark side that accompanies you, silence and sleep are your eternal words, follow my incantation and let the gathered material flow. Shadow curtain. Bright blue lips slightly parted, uttering a flawless chant. The ominous witch, shrouded in a black veil, strolled gracefully in the tranquil courtyard. The magic energy she released danced like butterflies weaving through a flower bed, and the shadows around her silently flowed and converged. The pristine moon in the high sky seemed dimmer compared to her chanting. The silver-haired youth lifted his gaze, observing the British witch beneath this nocturnal curtain, enveloped in mystery. Her shifting veil and hair seemed to intertwine night and snow. Her bright blue eyes carried a subtle, almost imperceptible, smile. Every inch of her voluptuous figure displayed exquisite curves, and the faintly moist skin beneath the deep black dress was like the moonlight adorning the night sky. A cloudless night with sparkling stars, the most marvelous mystery and darkness converged within her grace and gaze. Interwoven into a bewitching witch's visage, a beauty not seen in the bright daylight. Unable to chase after the flames, she concealed herself in the shadows. So, she always hid her face. Only in Alvin's presence did Morgan Le Fay, the witch, remove her veil, revealing a beauty akin to radiant moonlight. She blossomed within the shadows, much like a flower in the twilight. Alvin had never seen a witch teach magecraft so alluringly. Sensing Alvin's unwavering gaze, Morgan blushed beneath her sheer veil. But now, teaching magecraft was a matter of life and death, and she couldn't afford to maintain distance from her disciple. Focus on feeling the flow of my magic, Alvin. Under the scrutiny of the night and the moon, the witch held the young man's hand. As their inspiration communicated and linked, the flow of magic throughout Morgan's body was displayed in front of Alvin without reservation. The ether sang joyfully, shadows gathered, and the witch's soft incantation seemed like a melancholic melody. However, the so-called magic lesson had lost its significance to the young man. Just like her imposing aura, the witch's hand was as cold as he had imagined. So, Alvin gently held her palm. "Lady Morgan, your hand is quite cold." Alvin's subtle gesture made Morgan's body tremble as if touched by an electric current. A faint panic emerged in her bright blue pupils, accompanied by a blush that fluttered like intoxication. "Alvin, you! Look at me!" The youth's resounding voice caught Morgan off guard. She looked up, gazing at the disciple's face in front of her. So close. The silver-haired youth's delicate face was right before her, and his eyelashes, like light feathers, seemed almost tangible. He smiled, and his ash-grey eyes seemed to shine brightly under the moonlight. Clearly the cool moonlight, yet it burned like the sun. The previously cold hand now emitted a warm glow involuntarily. The skin-to-skin contact conveyed mutual feelings and warmth. Thus, Morgan realized. Alvin's hand felt so warm. She didn't want to let go. She didn't want to let go. She didn't want to let go for the rest of her life. A surge of thoughts flooded her mind. Facing each other, their eyes locked. Morgan finally, somewhat dazedly, realized, she had never been so close to Alvin. Just like her appearance. A veil of distance also shrouded the witch's heart. In many days past, she would hide in the shadows, secretly observing her disciple's profile when he was focused. This despicable act, akin to spying, brought intense guilt to Morgan, yet she couldn't stop it. Being hurt so much, maintaining distant relationships became a subconscious self-protection mechanism. Out of fear that Alvin would detest her, secretly observing from a distance brought Morgan a strangely comforting sense of security. But why not just look openly? This thought echoed in the witch's mind. Yes, Morgan realized only at this moment, she had never cared so much about someone. Alvin Pendragon. A masterpiece she meticulously crafted. He filled her chest, occupied her heart. Every concern, every thought, day and night, all revolved around him. Even though he was her creation. So, why not just openly gaze at him? Almost face to face. Those eyes of iron grey, so captivating, were right in front of her. Beautiful things always attract attention. So, I want to gaze at you more clearly. The roses in the courtyard swayed, and overlapping shadows flowed around them. Alvin raised his left hand, as if wanting to gently brush away Morgan's veil. Faced with the young man's presumptuous act, the witch's mind went blank. Instinctively, she wanted to stop him. However, her arm seemed to be filled with heavy mercury, making it difficult to lift. Or perhaps, was she actually anticipating his actions? As the black veil covering her face was gently lifted, the witch's exquisitely unparalleled face was revealed without any concealment for the first time before the young man. Although their appearances were similar, yet, the unique charm was entirely different from Artoria's determination. Her brows and eyes were enchanting, like the blooming orchids in a secluded valley, with a hint of shyness in her restraint. The intoxicating blush between the orchids made the beautiful figure under the moonlight seem like a dream. Summer's bright blue waves, eyes of such a color. Mature, vigorous, gentle, yet also like a serpent, forbidden, tempting, and deadly. The slightly raised fair neck, the elegant curve extending to the collarbone, then gently flowing to the full mountains. Those lines, those contours. Noble and untouchable. Like a black swan. Facing such divine beauty. A sincere admiration escaped from Alvin's heart. "You're truly beautiful." Accompanied by this almost dreamy praise. The hand the young man extended continued to move forward, about to touch the witch's face. The fingertips with warmth. As if wanting to pull her from the distant clouds, dragging her down to the mundane and decadent world. Then, at the moment when his hand touched the witch's skin, shadows flooded the space between his fingers. A gentle breeze stirred, Morgan's figure collapsed like a flowing water, turning into a pitch-black and thin shadow, melting into the ground, disappearing. Only a faint lingering fragrance remained on the fingertips, and the witch's deliberately calm and trembling voice lingered in the courtyard, like the rose petals swaying in the wind. "Why, you train well, Alvin. I suddenly feel tired and want to rest first." The witch's trembling voice gradually extinguished like a fading firework. The young man slightly bowed, smiling towards the moonlit courtyard. "Good night, Lady Morgan." His sincere wishes received no response. As usual, the witch who couldn't withstand teasing seemed to have fled awkwardly. The night breeze was cool, bathing in the falling rose petals. The silver-haired youth extended his hand, allowing a petal to fall into his palm. The shadow magic surging from within him instantly formed a vivid rose in his fingers. A thorny black rose. Just like the shy witch who shunned closeness, it resisted being approached but exuded a captivating fragrance. "Unfortunately, haven't seen enough yet." Alvin sighed faintly. It was unclear whether he referred to magic or the witch. The bouquet of roses formed by the convergence of shadows scattered in his palm. Alvin shook his head gently and began to focus on tonight's training, pretending not to notice those wandering gazes lurking in the shadows. Yes. The young man might not have had enough of the witch, but it didn't prevent the witch from appreciating the young man. Since the age of 5. The gradually developing keen senses of the ultimate life form made Alvin aware of Morgan's elusive scrutiny. Both being unparalleled geniuses magus from the age of gods, the witch's hidden magecraft was not something the young him could easily penetrate. Unfortunately, there was no other reason. This cousin spent too much time peeping every day. Almost several hours of high-intensity peeping every day. Even a witch couldn't always maintain perfect concealment of her magecraft. If Alvin didn't notice, the value of the ultimate life form would become a joke. But, despite having noticed this, Alvin tactfully did not expose it. He naturally understood that with Morgan's proud personality, if she were exposed, she would probably be embarrassed enough to hide in Gaia's mantle. And Alvin always knew that whenever he started changing before taking a bath, the peeping from the shadows would linger for a while on his symmetrical upper body, then shyly move away. If he wasn't peeped at one day, he would feel a bit uncomfortable. However, what made Alvin particularly curious was, what was Morgan doing when peeping? Very concerned. In the shadows swaying with the wind. The witch, maintaining her hidden state, blushed, gazing at the young man's clear face. Slightly heavy breaths maintained a rhythmic pace, and the fair and full curves rose and fell incessantly. Alvin! 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 Accompanied by the faint murmurs as if whispering. A tingling sensation like convulsions and electric shocks surged up the witch's nerves along the spine. His breast swayed, and the tidal waves surged. 42 years finally broken, a white dragon encountered, a lifetime misled. Feeling the infinite aftertaste as the resonance tide receded. A vague and ambiguous hot mist sighed out of Morgan's bright blue lips. She raised the hand that had been tightly held by Alvin before, and then, gently pressed it against her own cheek. It seemed to still retain his warmth. Dewdrops slid down the moist and sticky fingertips, and a few transparent threads reflected the crystal-clear moonlight in the night. As well as the intoxicating blush on the witch's face, like rose petals moistened by dew, charming and enchanting. My body feels so strange. I really want to get closer to you. If you find out, you must hate me, right? Hate this dark and despicable witch. But I can't leave you anymore. Alvin. Unable to resist, she reached out to touch his face. But the fingertips quickly and timidly retreated, not daring to get any closer. Morgan finally fled from here like escaping. Just in her shyness, she did not notice that a few drops of wet and sticky water stains from the treetop were inadvertently shaken off. Patter. While Alvin, who was casting Magecraft under the moonlight, glanced up at the cloudless night sky. Did it rain? Between the swaying shadows of the canopy. Only the bright moon was immaculate, and the stars were sparkling. Chapter 9 Archives of the Oldest AI in Humanity. The peculiar liquid that has touched you makes you somewhat curious. You wonder if it's the dewdrops falling from the trees. However, it doesn't seem to have rained recently. After thinking about it, unable to draw any reliable conclusions, you quickly dismiss such trivial matters from your mind. As you notice Morgan's departure, your focus on practicing Magecraft can finally enter a state of true concentration. However, inexplicably, returning to your room for rest after concluding your magical exercises, you dreamed of increasingly enigmatic content that night, all centered around the theme of the witch. The next morning, looking at the damp marks pervading your close-fitting clothes, you realize that the physique of the ultimate life form is gradually maturing and developing. Tisk, hitting puberty at just 8 years old. Reflecting on this, you systematically change into new clothes and stack the indecent ones that need washing neatly for the maid to take care of. Unless you simulate being a female body at some point, the arrival of puberty is not something to be nervous about for someone who has lived 2 lives. Last night's little episode doesn't seem to have affected your teaching progress with Morgan. As usual, you continue various exercises of shadow magic under her guidance. However, gradually, she no longer wears that dark veil in your presence, instead boldly revealing that attention-grabbing, enchanting, and charming face of the witch. During the breakfast, noticing the almost trance-like gaze of the young man, the witch's delicate cheeks appear slightly flushed. What's wrong? Is there something strange on my face? Morgan touches her own makeup, her fair fingertips nervously playing with the ends of her silver hair. The slightly trembling and soothing tone of her voice inadvertently leaves Alvin somewhat stunned. He then carefully, from top to bottom, thoroughly admires the witch, before speaking word by word. No. It's just that catching a glimpse of your countenance can be heart-stealing. The morning rose touched by dew is nowhere near 1,000th as beautiful as you. Not a mere flattery. It's an indisputable fact. Faced with such sincere praise, Alvin notices a slight upturn at the corners of Morgan's mouth. The eyes, like orchids, express joy, and her carefully adorned face is adorned with a hint of intoxicating blush. She is delighted. But she doesn't want to reveal her restraint. With a slight cough, the witch, feeling a bit guilty, averted her gaze and tried to put on an indifferent expression as she replied casually. Well then, if that's the case. From that moment on, Morgan no longer wore the veiled thin yarn in front of Alvin. So, apart from the plump and soft absolute territory of her thighs, his attention was once again taken by another part of the witch, her captivating and mesmerizing countenance. Especially these days, Morgan exuded a faint and refreshing fragrance, making Alvin feel a sense of familiarity. At the same time, he also noticed a slight warmth in his lower abdomen. Could this be the effect of the new fragrance concocted by the witch? Could it be that she added some kind of red flower? Not only that. Alvin also noticed one more thing: his clothes that he took for cleaning often went missing. He initially thought it was just a maid's negligence. However, after some investigation, he found that all the missing items were the most intimate undergarments. As an ultimate life form, Alvin's sense of smell was as sharp as Cerberus in hell. The faint fragrance lingering on the surface of the clothing directly exposed the true identity of the culprit. Amused and helpless, he could only pretend not to have noticed such a trivial matter. However, what on earth was Morgan doing with his undergarments? This made Alvin unable to help but let his imagination run wild. After removing the veil, from then on, the witch no longer hesitated to have physical contact with you. Not only that, she often intentionally or unintentionally got up close and personal, providing you with hands-on guidance for Magecraft, claiming that this would better demonstrate the flow of magic. Indeed, there was a flow. But, it wasn't just the magic that was flowing. The witch's fair fingertips seemed to deliberately brush across your arms. The musky fragrance, reminiscent of orchids, gently breathed by your nose, brought about a secret and indescribable tingling sensation. Feeling the soft and full sensation of the witch's skin against your back, the moist and gem-like touch, and the refreshing and faint fragrance that induced a warm sensation in your lower abdomen. It had to be said, the witch's enchantment was truly irresistible. Especially when Morgan looked at you, the amorous pink heart that seemed to appear in her eyes was like the foam about to overflow from a bottle of champagne. Facing such a gaze that seemed to want to devour you completely, you suddenly realized that, after that night's transgressions, you seemed to have opened some kind of extraordinary switch on the witch. Invisible as it was, the dynamics had already shifted from defense to offense. Watching the dark Magecraft continuously gather and disperse in your hands, your attempts at spellcasting unprecedentedly failed 3 times in a row. Magus often use the Magecraft from both major and minor sources for spellcasting. The major source lies in the vastness of nature, while the minor source is their own life force. The minor source within you was currently in chaos, and naturally, the major source had no basis to draw upon. Facing this formless and indifferent magical learning, you were acutely aware that continuing like this was not a solution. Could it be that you were really going to be devoured completely? As the saying goes, at 30, one becomes a wolf, at 40, a tiger. This seemingly innocent witch, of unknown age, appeared more like a tiger after a long absence. As the ultimate life form born from the phantasmal species blood, the magic and desires within your body were equally vigorous and outrageous. Keeping oneself chaste when presented with temptation is an act of a saint. However, you were far from a saint and could be considered a villain filled with wickedness. Facing the witch's domineering and arrogant aura, you really wanted to take the initiative to suppress her, letting her understand the undeniable truth about the ultimate life form. However, your current 8-year-old body might not withstand the daily squeezing from the witch's intimidating influence. Even if you were a gifted ultimate life form, you were afraid you would be drained and have no chance of practicing. Driving a big vehicle is a technical job. Now with a sea-level fuel tank endurance, it's likely it won't withstand the repeated bumps on the rough road presented by the witch. Amidst the lingering tenderness, gradually losing weight, where would there be excess energy to practice swordsmanship? You couldn't help but marvel at how your old man, Vortigern, had truly made a wise move. If you can't get past this stage with the witch, then naturally, there would be no way to practice the sword. You couldn't possibly choose to distance yourself from Morgan, as doing so might only make the hard-earned openness of the witch's heart even more tightly closed. In this moment, how should you handle yourself? Gazing at the brilliant night sky of Britain, your chaotic emotions, along with the vast moonlight, seemed to become somewhat trance-like. You stared at the moon. And it seemed like the moon was also staring at you. What kind of feelings do you harbor for Morgan? Compassion for tragedy, respect for the mentor, or perhaps, possessiveness towards a beautiful woman? It seemed like all of the above. But most importantly, your determination to protect her. You want to pull her down from that cold cloud to this mundane world. As long as you're around, no one will ever make her cry. Without hesitation, you instantly clarified your answer. The night was lonely and dark, and although your heart was in turmoil, it was as unwavering as the bright moon hanging above. With a clear mind, you can see the way forward. You calmly understood that you were not a saint, you wanted the witch, and you wanted to practice. It was not a choice. Perhaps, you could make your heart calm. So, how to calm the restlessness of this ultimate life form's adolescence? Effortlessly suppressing your tendency to stand tall, you gradually formulated a plan. Taking inspiration from AI drawing techniques, you secretly developed a new kind of spell. It utilized the flowing nature of shadow magic to spontaneously create black and white images with customizable keywords. Initially, the quality of the images was quite crude, but with your meticulous adjustments, the images quickly became more and more refined. Finally, after a month of tireless efforts and neglecting meals, sensing that Morgan was deeply asleep in the adjacent room, you activated the finished Magecraft spell, nervously inputting keywords like silver hair, witch, older sister, garter socks, revealing naval outfit, and other crucial terms. Gazing at the hundreds and thousands of vivid and exquisite Morgan hentai images produced by the spell, you successfully entered Sage Mode, Day 0. You began to contemplate the ultimate meaning of your existence, where you came from and where you were going. Ultimately, what is the purpose of human life? Your thoughts felt clear and enlightened, as if your brain had undergone a sudden upgrade. Now that you had mastered the switch for Sage Mode, the enchanting demeanor of the witch was no longer a threat to your determined heart. You skillfully balanced the delicate relationship between love and practice. The days, both troubled and fulfilling, passed one by one. Your relationship with Morgan became increasingly intimate, moving forward in unspoken agreement towards the common expectations of each other. With the immersive study and research of both body and mind, your proficiency in illusion, assassination, concealment, surveillance, and stealth continued to advance. Combining experiences from two lives and the phantasmal species blood within you, you further deduced various life-saving techniques and insights beyond the field of magic. You acquired a talent, Mind's Eye, True. Mind's Eye, True, a survival instinct forged through knowledge, mental flow, and the intuition of an ultimate life form. No matter how perilous the situation, it cannot defeat your hope for that slim chance of survival. Faced with insurmountable danger or multiple attackers, you will subconsciously exhibit the most efficient and self-preserving combat style. Chapter 10, A knight not proficient in assassination isn't a good soldier. While delving into the study of Magecraft, you also began training in combat. You still chose the sword as your weapon of choice, but keeping in mind the system's thoughtful hint, you didn't forget to practice the spear in your spare time. Unfortunately, in this era, rapid-fire revolving breech-loading firearms have not been developed yet. Otherwise, your swordsmanship would have reached the pinnacle of the Ashina arts. The Ashina arts is okay. But is this system implying I'm trash? But everyone is randomly shooting magical beams. Who the hell fights in melee combat? Pouring the power of shadow magic into the fragile wooden sword in his hand, a seemingly casual strike effortlessly sliced through the skeleton summoned by Morgan, akin to cutting butter. He was almost immersed in the exhilaration of this battle arts improvement. The combat instincts of an ultimate life form were truly extraordinary. With just a short training session each day, his body quickly grasped the muscle memory formed over years by seasoned soldiers. Combined with the mind's eye honed through his training, if he sensed a weakness in the enemy, the Sword of Seamless Shadows could determine victory or defeat in an instant. His old man, Vortigern, occasionally joined in for practice. In such times, it had nothing to do with victory or defeat. Alvin could only say that lasting a few more seconds was considered a win. Under the torrential Vortigern's swordsmanship, his sword in hand seemed precarious, like a floating duckweed in the rain, about to be overturned in an instant. But with each new sparring session, the time he could endure would become longer. Vortigern does not deliberately urge you to practice combat skill, yet your skills continue to advance rapidly. 3 years passed quickly, and in Vortigern's castle gaze, he, who sparing with only 30% of his strength, still couldn't break your defense after 10 rounds. Dropping the broken wooden sword, you could feel a significant improvement in your combat skill. However, when you looked at Vortigern, you couldn't see any joy in his eyes. Silent, the old man eventually let out a faint sigh. Alvin, in terms of swordsmanship, there's nothing more I can teach you. In the future, explore the path you want to take on your own. Watching Vortigern's figure gradually fade into the night, the vast twilight of this night did not make the old man's departure seem lonely. You had never seen Vortigern so desolate. Why would the great king, carrying the name of rebellion and tyranny, sigh at his son's rapid growth? You realized that the answer behind might be extremely cruel. Even so, this couldn't stop the steps of your practice. You didn't know when the next simulation trigger would be, and opportunities were rare. You would grasp every possibility favoring survival. Disguise, stealth, assassination, counter-surveillance, breath concealment. Rather than a knight, you were becoming more like a rogue assassin in terms of skills. And you had no qualms about it. As Vortigern said, surviving made everything possible. Your ability to survive was improving at an exaggerated speed, and soon even Morgan couldn't criticize your skills. She had to admit that now, even as a great magus, it would take some effort to take you down. For an 11-year-old child, this was truly incredible. Today, you already had the capital to protect yourself. Alvin Pendragon, the birth of the son of the White Dragon remained unknown to the world. Therefore, you didn't need to disguise yourself and could stand proudly in the sunlight. The time was ripe, it was time to measure this vast land with your own 2 feet. Under the shining moon and brilliant stars. Facing the moonlight, you pushed open the bedroom lattice, leaped from the high tower of the castle, and your agile figure dissolved into the boundless night, like water melting into water. Vortigern strengthened the patrol of the city guards as a test for you, but soon even the tightest defense became meaningless. Using the cover of night, the massive castle city became as familiar as your living room. With your adept use of shadow stealth, you moved freely through the streets of Londinium. Setting out before dawn and returning at dusk, the changing times of day were the moments you entered and exited. With the advancement of your various skills, your range of travel during your outings expanded. Initially, just strolling in the forests near the fortress, gradually your footsteps extended to towns and villages 100 miles away from Londinium. For you, as an ultimate life form, covering long distances like a galloping horse was not a difficult task. During your travels, you encountered bandits more than once, including marauders from the Anglo-Saxons and faces of the Celts. You sighed, but it was not surprising. In such chaotic times, the law of the jungle where the strong preyed on the weak naturally became a universal survival creed. Everyone said that these bandits were Vortigern's minions. The reason why the once Great Britannia fell into its current state of turmoil and chaos was the catastrophic disaster caused by the dragon filled with evil deeds. Is that so? These rumors, contradicting what you've seen, plunged you into increasing confusion. What does your old man really want to do? Despite carrying the rebellious and unjust name of the king, Vortigern strictly prohibited his army from engaging in plunder, and violators were severely punished. To address the issue of these foreigners, he rewarded them with land for cultivation, exchanged war merits for exemption from taxes, and built houses. Since then, they no longer wandered. Land issues were often the root cause of turmoil, and you couldn't help but marvel, Vortigern undoubtedly had a visionary strategic vision. Combined with the iron-fisted methods of the dragon, the large army of foreigners, though initially a potential threat, was now under the command and loyalty of this king. While there might be deserters and bandits, encountering so many robbers seemed a bit too much. More strangely, after Vortigern captured a city, he never launched looting or massacres. Instead, after searching the city, he allowed the Celts to flee with their families and belongings. Rather than capturing cities, it seemed more like driving these people away. Vortigern often led the army around, not seeking wealth or power. Then, what was he really after? If he truly wanted to command the foreigners to plunder his own people, why take such a roundabout approach? Unfortunately, Vortigern never answered your questions. That old man is indeed a mysterious person who leaves people with endless thoughts. Without a doubt, these roaming foreign peoples were not Vortigern's army. However, faced with bandits engaged in robbery, you had no mercy. Scoff. The nearly imperceptible dim sword light, like shadows, cut through bones and flesh, emitting an irritating scraping sound. Blooming blood splattered like raindrops on the small path between the woods, slowly seeping into the soil. Wiping the bloodstains off the sword with his fingertips, Alvin, even though it was his first time killing, felt no fluctuation in his emotions. No pleasure, no fear. Watching a person's body being severed before his eyes, it was no different from swinging a sword at a wooden stake, with the cuts consistently clean and neat. After all, Alvin couldn't invest any emotions in killing. Perhaps, he thought, he really possessed the cold-blooded traits akin to a villain. Watching the head of a fallen comrade in front of him, the shocking scene made the legs of the mountain bandits start to tremble. Walking out slowly from the spreading pool of blood, the clean and new blade reflected their terrified faces. "Since you've drawn your swords, I assume you've prepared to die." Along with the words of the silver-haired youth, the stacked shadows began to flow quietly between the trees. The thin and intangible dim sword light silently passed through the necks, as if the Grim Reaper was swinging its scythe to reap souls. But it was just an instant shadow. Pfft! All the bandits who dared to draw their swords had their heads severed by Alvin in the horrified gazes. "The wind is tight, scatter." The group of mountain bandits dispersed like birds and beasts. However, for those smart enough to choose to run away, Alvin had no excellent qualities of forgiveness like a saint. Crack! The thin shadow accurately passed through the gaps between the fingers. Almost simultaneously, the escaping bandits suddenly emitted a series of continuous painful cries. They gasped in pain and fell to the ground, looking at their severed fingers in the mud, subconsciously trying to pick them up but horrified to find that they couldn't. Because everyone's hands were left with bare palms, acquiring a Doraemon-like action figure for the rest of their lives. "I spared your lives since you didn't draw your swords." Squatting in front of the mountain bandit leader, Alvin's iron-grey eyes were calm. "Remember my face. If there are any remnants seeking revenge, feel free to come find me." Bathing in the fearful and resentful gazes of the crowd, the silver-haired youth left with these words without looking back. Walking through the vast forests of Britannia, you indulged in the study of various flora from the age of gods. In the forest, towering giant trees, so immense that several people would need to embrace them to measure their girth, stood densely. Lush foliage covered them, and their trunks were straight and robust. The emerald green canopy almost completely blocked the sunlight, making your originally tall figure appear extremely small. "So, this is the favor of the age of gods." The silver-haired youth extended his hand, caressing the towering ancient tree in front of him. Between the palm and the rough bark, a subtle sound was produced, spreading gently in this quiet forest. The stark contrast between the towering and the tiny created a palpable sense of the silent awe brought by nature. He leaped suddenly, using agile movements to jump among the intricate branches. A swift, silver figure quickly disappeared within the lush green canopy. Standing on a sturdy branch in the midst of the forest, with verdant leaves falling around him, the sunlight from the sky above filtered through the cracks in the branches, sprinkling on the youth's cheeks. His fair skin, illuminated by the clear light, exhibited a delicate and refined charm akin to translucent jewels. Standing atop this massive branch in the forest canopy, Alvin gazed towards the endless horizon bathed in the sunlight. As far as the eye could see, there were towering green clouds and a sea of blue. Chapter 11, The Silver Star Guiding the Way. In the 21st century, such magnificent and lush landscapes are nowhere to be found. Evidently, bathed in this nature filled with true ether, even ordinary plants have astonishing growth compared to the future. You carefully gather fruits from various plants, preparing for your research project. Wearing a cloak made of leaves and woven shoes from hemp, you drink morning dew and eat wild fruits for sustenance. When hungry, you fill your stomach with grass fruits, and when thirsty, you drink from mountain springs, resting against the branches of ancient trees when tired. You long lost experience the refreshing feeling of freedom. Whether it's the exam-oriented education of your past life or the busy life in the clock tower, this is a comfort you've never experienced before. Wandering through the mountains and waters, as the ultimate life form. Everything in the vast land of Britannia is as familiar to you as a fish in water. In this life reminiscent of freedom, you complete your initial research in the forest. To further collect seeds of various crops, your footsteps gradually extend to the surrounding towns and villages. However, what you see and hear makes you slightly shocked. Bathed in the abundant true ether of the age of gods, it's not just plants that thrive in this age. Various beasts, fairies, and even phantasmal species frequently appear on this land. Humans are not the only primates in this nature, the era is flourishing with all kinds of life. However, whether it's a chaotic era or a prosperous one, the hardships of the common people remain the same. The iron cavalry of the petty king has never swept into these peaceful towns and villages. Yet, using the pretext of wartime mobilization, the residents of this area not only suffer from the lord's harsh taxation but also often face raids from bandits and robbers. Tax officials sent by the lord appear imposing when collecting food and troops, but the protective guards, who should defend the residents, are always nowhere to be found during bandit attacks, often arriving late after the looting is over. The knights of those noble families always uphold humility and compassion as virtues, and perhaps engaging in activities like hunting down bandits sounds too vulgar, tarnishing the glory passed down through generations. You see many people in the towns and villages with yellow and thin faces, some even barely clothed and hungry. Despite living in a glorious age with abundant resources compared to the future, it seems filling one's stomach has become a luxury for the people. Most people silently endure this rule of reality, considering it a natural part of their lives. But you, who have experienced the modern political education system, understand the essence of its operation. All the bloody capital accumulation comes from the exploitation of surplus human value. Without disparities, artificial disparities must be created. To forever lack a sense of security is to forever be a slave. After all, how can the wealth of a few be highlighted without the poverty of the majority? Knights. These hypocritical, conflicting, and dirty things, riding under them are not 1,000 miles of swift horses but the blood and sweat of the people, draped over them are not luxurious armor but the piled-up bones of the commoners. You give a few wild fruits to the beggars who ask for help, silently watching them tearfully grateful. You can't help but think of the sorrowful lament from ancient ages. Although it is only 6 short words, it fully expresses the true essence of the rise and fall of empires. Rise, people suffer. Fall, people suffer. Suffering. As expected, all these tragedies are blamed on the faults of Vortigern. For the lords in high positions, the despicable dragon is an extremely useful excuse. The more chaotic the situation, the easier it is to plunder on a large scale, and as for the lives of the people, who really cares about them? Facing this scene of internal and external troubles, you sigh softly and start accepting various dangerous tasks in the town, tasks that are considered dangerous for knights, demanding only various crop seeds as rewards. You venture deep alone and eliminate the bandits lurking nearby. The retaliatory bandits are killed by you to the point of chilling, no longer daring to appear and disturb. Ferocious beasts, upon sensing your presence, become as tame as household pets, and even the one-eyed giant falls under the sword of your seamless shadows. Soon, the residents in the surrounding areas hear about a charming and strange young knight traveling nearby, with exceptional skills but only symbolically accepting a few bags of barley seeds as a reward. Requests for your assistance become overwhelming. For the truly needy, you spare no effort in helping. However, for the various invitations and banquets that follow one after another, you don't even bother to reply to the refusal. Ironically, despite repeatedly emphasizing that you are not some so-called knight, people still spread rumors that you may be a hidden descendant of a knight, praising you for possessing the noble virtues of humility, compassion, and justice. If they knew your true identity, you wonder what expressions they would show. Just thinking about that scene makes you find it quite amusing. With the accumulation of achievements under your sword, the magical creatures you tame and subdue also grow more and more. Your fame gradually rises, and the towns and villages around start spreading the tale of a silver-haired young knight with a graceful figure, calling you the silver star guiding the way. Rumors about this silver-haired young knight, charming as if stepping out of a painting, with a charm comparable to divine crafts, spread far and wide. People praise your enchanting charm that makes hearts flutter. Beautiful young ladies from deep within their chambers, not caring about being covered in mud, choose to wait for you by the fields where you often appear. Even lords want to marry their daughters to you, hoping to gain your favor. Can't deny it, it's quite satisfying to be so attractive. However, whenever those noble ladies throw silky, flirtatious glances at you, a cold and dark aura always floats not far behind you. Needless to say, it's Morgan, who is clearly jealous. This tsundere cousin of yours will never let you go out alone. Just to cater to her little thoughts, you continue to pretend not to notice her care along the way. Naturally, how can these rouge and powder compare to Morgan? Just on the basis of wearing white silk, they lose to black silk suspenders by too much. To get rid of these meaningless and vulgar pursuits, you use the giant's magic core as material, carving out a pair of exquisite rings shimmering with a dark luster. You slowly wear the one engraved with Morgan name on your ring finger. The ring on the ring finger symbolizes a faithful engagement. In this way, you unilaterally swear sovereignty over the witch through this method. To avoid harassment, this is an unavoidable solution. You think, Morgan shouldn't blame you, right? She looking at you carefully packaging the other ring. While hearing you muttering something like far worse than my Morgan at home. In your perception, it seems that the witch shyly escapes. Chapter 12, the so-called night. As the days passed, your research on this vast land delved deeper, gradually becoming well versed in the habits of various plants and magical creatures. You found yourself enriched, realizing that the intellectual knowledge etched in your mind was the true treasure compared to the abundant combat virtues of this ultimate life form. With your current knowledge, returning to the clock tower might allow you to conduct a small lecture series on identifying popular creatures of the Age of Gods. After all, despite being a mentor, this vast magical knowledge comes solely from various materials and texts, unlike your ability to interact with vivid real entities. The first-hand experience of the Age of Gods is indeed a dimensional blow. Feeling adequately prepared, you began to plan the initiation of your research project on crop improvement, which would require a piece of experimental land for agriculture. When you inquired about the most fertile farmland nearby, the townspeople unanimously pointed to the same answer. If you talk about fertile land, that would be Sir Ector's wheat field. Similar to the righteous you, Sir Ector is a genuine good person, often providing relief to the town's poor with food. He will surely welcome your visit. Following the townspeople's guidance, you set off toward the purported wheat field on the outskirts of town. The sky was clear, cloudless, and today's Britain was bathed in the brilliant sunshine of autumn. Not yet fully traversing the dense forest beyond the town, the unique fragrance of barley and wheat wafted up to your face with the gentle breeze of this autumn day. Standing on a giant tree, you gazed into the distance, and at the horizon's edge, a dazzling golden light faintly appeared. Listening to the wind's guidance, you slowly made your way toward the wheat field. Clang, clang, clang. The rhythmic and cadenced sounds reached your ears, something very familiar from your training in the combat field. It was the sound of chopping practice dummies. Approaching the source of the sound, you noticed the young man practicing swordplay in the grassy field, his flowing blonde hair swaying in the wind like the radiant wheat field itself. Marching forward, sword swinging diagonally, as steady as a rock, swift as thunder. Clang! A crisp breaking sound echoed. The golden-haired youth, holding a wooden sword in a mid-level stance, was diligently chopping at the training dummy before him. His fair and clean neck glistened slightly with sweat, and each swing of the sword was flawless, exhibiting precision, elegance, and a sense of beauty in swordsmanship, strength, and skill. Seemingly aware of the presence of an outsider, his sword movements hesitated slightly. The golden-haired youth paused, raised his gaze, and their eyes met as if by fate. In that moment of seeing each other's faces, Alvin couldn't help but be stunned. It wasn't just him, the other party seemed equally surprised. The reason was simple. This golden-haired youth was exceptionally good-looking. The level of handsomeness on this face seemed to outshine even Alvin in his ultimate life form. And it wasn't just about the looks. There was an unassuming charm that the simple peasant attire couldn't conceal, an otherworldly aura as if he stood alone against the world. With flowing golden hair, deep green eyes as clear as a jewel, and that eye-catching stray strand of hair, he was indeed a top tier among handsome young men. Moreover, it felt familiar. For some reason, the face gave Alvin a sense of déjà vu, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't recall where he had seen this man's face. A faint sense of unease lingered in his mind, refusing to leave. However, for certain special reasons, Alvin quickly ignored the familiarity of the face. His attention subtly shifted, and his gaze instinctively began to scrutinize the young man, a natural scrutiny after experiencing various ill-intentioned encounters. A well-proportioned physique. Muscle lines that were full and firm without being excessive. And the stance he held while wielding the sword, seemingly effortless. Alvin's enhanced senses quickly picked up on this. Undeniably, the guy was skilled in swordsmanship too. "May I ask who you are?" A gender-neutral voice resonated across the wheat field, comfortable like a gentle breeze brushing against the face. The golden-haired youth sheathed his wooden sword, and with a bit of awkwardness, asked, keeping his gaze fixated on Alvin's face for an extended period. Alvin nodded in acknowledgement and replied, "Alvin. Silver Star guiding the way." Upon hearing this name, the youth's originally excited expression froze for a moment. "Seeing your appearance, I had a guess, and it seems my guess was right. Recently, your deeds have been frequently talked about in Essex County. Slaying bandits, taming magical creatures, defeating giants, refusing the recruitment of the lords, and helping the weak without expecting anything in return. Despite being of the same age, you uphold such noble justice. Undoubtedly, you possess the virtues of humility and compassion, a knight senior worthy of our admiration and learning. As if meeting an idol they admired. The golden-haired youth spoke with excitement, his eyes shining with admiration. Undeniably, being admired felt refreshing. However, the title of Silver Star Guiding the Way always carried a sense of embarrassment. But it sounded nice. Actually, Alvin was well aware that in the eyes of the people, he was considered a big shot. Despite that, Silver Star Guiding the Way made him feel like he was labeled as a leader of manual labor. Moreover, he felt a strange sense of familiarity with the face, and he tried hard to remember but couldn't recall where he had seen that man's face. Feeling a slight discomfort, Alvin quickly ignored the familiarity due to certain special reasons. However, he felt the need to correct the misunderstanding in the face of the youth's admiration. "Sorry, but I'm not a knight, and I don't like being called one." Hearing such a response, the originally excited expression of the golden-haired youth faltered for a moment. "What do you mean? I don't have a title, and my ancestors don't have any commendable glory," Alvin honestly replied, and that was indeed an accurate statement. After all, the glory of a knight? His old man was the vile King Vortigern. Not being drowned in spit was already good enough. Clearly positioned as a villain full of evil deeds. How did he become the Silver Star Guiding the Way in the eyes of people? Maybe that's just another alias for a labor foreman. Besides, the so-called knights in Britannia, I despise associating with them. Being called a knight together with them makes me feel ashamed. Shame, ashamed. The golden-haired youth repeated the word in disbelief. Why would you say that? As a non-productive, competitive, violently armed class created through exploiting labor, aiming to maintain noble rule, the so-called chivalry, despite sounding grand, cannot change the ugly nature of representing exploitation. Alvin pointed out the essence of the knight class without mincing words but thought of explaining it in simpler terms since the other party might not understand these terms. In simple terms, knight games and such are very hypocritical. Hypocritical. Never expected to receive such an answer from the admired person. The golden-haired youth bit his lip, seemingly wanting to argue. But your noble conduct undoubtedly fits the knight's code of conduct. So, is this noble conduct something brought about by the title of a knight? Alvin asked with interest. Is it that having virtues makes one a knight, or is it the title of a knight that makes people possess these virtues? This. Chapter 13, 13 Just wanted to see your expression. In the face of Alvin's inquiry, the golden-haired youth revealed a bewildered expression. He had never engaged in such complex contemplation nor considered these profound questions before. Due to the admiration of his foster father's figure and the responsibility he bore, the youth aspired to become a knight. The title of a knight represented justice, represented the hope of saving Britain, this was ingrained in him since childhood. However, it was merely an aspiration. Aspiration was the farthest distance from understanding. The stark reality is, praising those who harbor virtues as knights allows the discordant and sordid individuals to also share in the crown of justice. Alvin's gaze seemed to scorch the youth. If it were you, would you be pleased with such acknowledgement? The golden-haired youth fell silent. He was truly intelligent. So even though he couldn't fully grasp some vocabulary, he could still understand Alvin's expression. And precisely because he understood, it became challenging to respond. The other party was right. If knights were all virtuous do-gooders, marauding bandits wouldn't persist for so long. They wouldn't have to wait for the so-called Silver Star Guiding the Way to single-handedly seek retribution. Witnessing the chaos in the town caused by bandits, he had also thought about contributing to easing everyone's troubles. However, this notion was discouraged by his foster father, who advised him that, with his esteemed status, he shouldn't attract attention. The spread of his name would draw the attention of Vortigern. Furthermore, he was pointed out that he currently lacked the determination to kill, trying to face bandits with a heart of persuasion was naive and pointless. Always expecting goodness from people. To become a king, you're far from ruthless enough. Being criticized so unreservedly by his foster father, the golden-haired youth had to give up. Ruthless. This word deeply pierced into his heart. To become a king, did he have to learn to be ruthless? The youth found it hard to accept such a cruel truth. Until, he heard about the name Silver Star guiding the way in the town. Peers of similar age were undertaking benevolent deeds he aspired to, temporarily freeing the young man from his hardship and igniting a deep yearning. Silver Star guiding the way, this coveted title, was subsequently etched into his heart. However, at this moment, upon hearing Alvin's straightforward words, the youth finally realized the malice concealed within the praises. Yes, why? Why should one's virtuous deeds, acknowledged as the righteous actions of a knight, be reasonable? Clearly, he was of the same age, yet he was adorned with the shackles of righteousness. To be acclaimed as a knight who slays villains at the age of 11 would surely bring shame to every self-proclaimed knight in the region. Sorry. Realizing the actions of the knights, he became more aware of his immaturity in thinking. I don't know how to answer your question. But at least, the golden-haired youth spoke with bitterness. You are a good person. Good person. Alvin fell silent for a moment. It's truly a heavy term. People can tolerate the looting of bandits, endure the exploitation of lords, and gradually consider these laws of the jungle as natural. However, when it comes to good people, various demanding requirements often follow. If there's even a slight moral flaw, their motives are subject to widespread questioning. As a good person, one becomes a target. The world works in such a way that being called a good person is not a pleasant blessing. Alvin shook his head gently, looking out over the golden wheat fields swaying in the wind. Amidst the brilliance of gold, the silver symbolizing the son of the white dragon appeared singular and lonely. Unfortunately, I'm going to disappoint you again. I'm not a good person at all. I do these things merely to satisfy my own desires. I need seeds for crops. Today, I came to borrow your fields for a while. To be honest, these rumors have caused me quite some distress. But unfortunately, people tend to mythologize those they worship. I tried to explain, but it didn't work. I'm sorry. If he were a knight, he wouldn't joke about such an honorable topic. Listening to Alvin's extremely candid tone, the golden-haired youth's expression seemed somewhat dazed. Faced with these harsh but real truths that he rarely contemplated in the past, he lowered his eyes, revealing a sense of melancholy called disillusionment. Sorry, Sir Alvin. This is quite sudden. Ha ha ha. He felt so disappointed, so disheartened. It was like the shattering of a beautiful dream. After saying so much, he just wanted to see this expression. Unexplainably. Seeing the grey and dim expression on the other's face, a secret and excited thrill suddenly rose in Alvin's heart. It was so exhilarating. Yes. He just wanted to see this guy's expression, this kind of heartbroken and disillusioned expression, as if it were as intoxicating as fine wine. Ah! A little more disappointment. A little more sadness. Just like that, revealing confusion and sorrow. Wait a minute. What is this? The curve that unconsciously appeared at the corner of his mouth as he brushed his fingertips over it. For a moment, Alvin was slightly stunned. He raised his gaze, looking at the golden-haired youth's delicate face, feeling the surging and intense pleasure in his heart. The hand holding the sword handle couldn't help but tremble. He wanted to. He wanted to bully him, defeat him. Even, defile him, insult him. To make him fall into corruption, sink into debauchery, and unable to extricate himself. Just imagining such scenes. A profound and thrilling pleasure seemed to surge in his heart. Subconsciously refuting the ugliness of the knights, envisioning the vision of crushing the other, was also for this unbearable pleasure. What is happening? Alvin tried to control the sword handle, took a deep breath, and exhaled gently. He couldn't help but question himself in this numbness. Eat him. Corrupt him. Defile him. Insult him. Violate him. In his mind, there seemed to be such overlapping voices roaring. What the hell is this? Why did he suddenly go crazy and change his preferences? Indeed, this guy, who could be described as the best among beautiful youths, had a body full of sturdy muscles. But the attractiveness shouldn't be that different from his own, right? When he looked in the mirror, there was no reaction at all. This, although it's embarrassing, but... WTF? Why would he want to corrupt a man? Oh no, he have too much male hormone. Feeling the surge of emotion in his heart, Alvin was somewhat numb and horrified, and he was on the verge of losing control. Yes, his previous self had never encountered such an irresistible impulse, even when facing the absolute zone of the witch with her black silk suspenders. Having tasted hundreds and thousands of Morgan's explicit pictures, he was very sure that there was nothing wrong with his preference. You can question his character, but you can't insult his preference. Or rather, who is this guy in front of me? Trying to suppress the surging waves of emotion in his heart, Alvin calmly held the trembling sword handle and then smiled, asking, "I haven't asked for your name." The golden-haired youth hesitated for a moment. After a little consideration, he cautiously revealed his name. A.R. Artorias. Chapter 14, 14 as Antagonist, making protagonist fall is basic, right? What did you say? Artorias. The sequence of quite familiar syllables caused Alvin's brain to be suddenly flooded with a sensation akin to an electric shock. Details that were subconsciously ignored by his thoughts resurfaced, and a golden strand of hair, swaying in the wind, suddenly became remarkably conspicuous. The magic resistance of an ultimate life form lifted the subtle veil that had clouded Alvin's awareness. Artorias. Artoria. In the instant of realizing this connection, the obstructive sensation, like seeing flowers through mist, vanished without a trace. Looking up at this orthodox saber face, Alvin finally realized that he had encountered an unmistakable authentic version of the iconic Ahog. He is super, stunned. So that's it. The predetermined as archenemies in the prophecy, the Red Dragon and White Dragon of Britain were destined to clash in this lifetime. Finally he found out why he went crazy before, to the point where he changed his preference from women to men. Apparently, the youth in front of him was Saber this world. Alvin found a rational explanation for his emotional turmoil. However, this couldn't change the fact that he seemed like a male tsundere. Painful, too painful. The golden-haired youth's face, like the remembered countenance of King Arthur, was soft yet resolute. How could King Arthur be a woman? Even the cold-blooded killer Emi Yakiritsugu would find such an exaggerated setup worthy of complaint. So, in his world, Saber is a male? Indeed, it made sense, but why on earth? Originally simulating the Britain of the 5th century, the thought of meeting the living Artoria once excited Alvin. After all, within the vast sea of Wayfus, Artoria's strength, determination and enlightenment were indeed eye-catching, like a star. But more importantly, she was a blonde, strand-of-haired tsundere beauty, with a delicate figure and an overall appealing appearance. Damn it! System, give me back my waifu. Just thinking about having to engage in a literal, powerful fencing duel with this youth in the future, Alvin felt that his prospects were bleak and dull. Ah, this is the retribution for cause and effect, isn't it? After shattering the illusion for the other party, it was Alvin's turn to experience heartbreak immediately. Looking at the handsome golden-haired youth before him, Alvin let out a long sigh. Who the hell wants the male to fall into darkness? On the other side, after barely uttering his own name, Artorias saw Alvin's expression change, fluctuating between gloom and brightness. Finally, she let out a faint sigh, covering her face as if feeling somewhat disheartened, and sat in the wheat field. Well, it seemed like his own immaturity had troubled him. Yes, if he were in the other person's shoes, he wouldn't appreciate these almost sarcastic praises. Sorry, Sir Alvin. The wheat field is dirty and messy. Please get up quickly, so as not to soil your clothes. Looking at the hand reaching out to him, the fair skin of the arm was so delicate it almost resembled that of a woman. Alvin couldn't help but be slightly stunned. No. That's not right. His thoughts, like gears clicking into place, realized the further sense of dissonance. His perception was still being influenced. To the extent that he overlooked the most obvious possibility. Rubbing his forehead, Alvin quickly categorized and cleared the chaotic thoughts. He then firmly grasped the offered hand, slowly standing up. The softness of the skin in the palm of his hand confirmed Alvin's speculation. Lifting his gaze, he scrutinized Artorias before him once again, now with a godlike perspective. At this moment, it was easy to detect those, almost glaring clues. Although there were no signs of femininity in terms of body curves or neutral voice, the excessively gentle jawline and the soft touch of the hand's skin still betrayed her true gender. So that's it. So that's it. The original Saber setting was actually a cross-dressing village girl. No wonder she shared the same face as a certain Orleans village girl. Just as Radagon is to Marika, Artorias is to Artoria. The moonlit world is quite interesting, isn't it? As a bystander, Alvin finally understood the well-known secret of this veteran the moonlit world fan. He let out a long breath. Thank goodness, he wasn't truly a male tsundere. That was close to shaking his heart. Rather, after discovering such a truth, the impulse to make her fall into darkness became even stronger. How should he put it? He was designated as the ultimate antagonist with full of evil deeds. As King Arthur, Artoria was undoubtedly the protagonist of Britannia. As an antagonist, making the protagonist fall, isn't that a basic operation? Alvin's mind sparked with interesting thoughts. Yes. To prove that the simulation wasn't a predetermined loop, the simplest way was to break the established historical facts and stir the trajectory of the era into chaos. For example, corrupting the pure and innocent Artoria. Perhaps adding a lifelong regret? Although, it might be more effective to kill her immediately here, making fate deviate even more. But, could he really kill her? Alvin had doubts about that. Putting aside the absolute defense of Avalon, the future King Arthur was an artificial son of the Red Dragon, a non-human being of the same level as himself. Even if he were to shatter her heart, it didn't necessarily mean she would die. Moreover, just like his witch elder sister, serving under Uther, that legendary magus of flowers Merlin, it was hard to believe that she wasn't guarding her. That's right. Thinking carefully, the Magecraft that twisted cognition must be the work of that Merlin, right? Fortunately, Alvin's resistance as an ultimate life form was high enough, otherwise, he might have been kept in the dark. Note for himself, must speed up awakening dark will as soon as possible. She wasn't aware that he had seen through her disguise, and that was an advantage. As a magus adept at manipulating shadows, Alvin understood the principle of keeping the enemy in the dark while revealing oneself. For a character like Artoria, destroying her body was meaningless. Her real strength lay in her unwavering heart. Not to mention, the sheath of Excalibur she held, Avalon, could heal any injury. As the saying goes, attack the body below, attack the heart above. To truly defeat her, one had to shatter her heart. To make her lethargic mentally, weaken her will, erode her beliefs, and crush her determination. Killing is, after all, a way to eliminate the heart. Examining his such unbearable thoughts, the young boy showed a gentle, refreshing smile to the girl. Chapter 15, 15 I crave a worthy opponent. Artoria. Alvin admired her in this manner. Genes leaping with excitement, dragon's blood roaring. Corrupt her. Defile her. Insult her. Violate her. Impulses as disgraceful as these, stemming from bloodlines, were growing increasingly intense, echoing repeatedly in his mind. Yet, Alvin adeptly tucked away these conflicting thoughts deep within himself, donning the mask named gentleness and humility. Thank you. Smiling, Alvin spoke these words as he gazed at the young girl before him. The subtle gaze from the silver-haired youth made the girl slightly embarrassed. The golden-haired girl, dressed as a boy, unconsciously took a step back. For some reason, she felt a strong, vortex-like attraction in Alvin's iron-grey eyes, making her involuntarily gaze at him with a sense of fascination. Deep as an abyss. Vast as the sea. It was an aura even more mysterious than the magus in her dreams, captivating her with an unparalleled charm. Until now, she had never encountered someone of the opposite sex with such allure. Even as the daughter of the Red Dragon born as a king, she found herself temporarily immersed in the transcendent charm of this ultimate life form. And her right hand was still tightly held by him. The contact of their skin conveyed a scorching warmth from that side. While noticing this, she couldn't help but let out a soft exclamation. Above her head, it seemed like a misty heat fog was rising. The girl looked somewhat tense at the interlocked hands, and a faint, imperceptible blush appeared on her delicate face under the sunlight. Ah! A heat haze, as if steaming, seemed to rise above her head. The girl stared somewhat narrowly at their clasped hands, and a subtle blush emerged on her exquisite face in the sunlight. Ah, Sir Alvin, can you release it now? Sorry, my bad. Alvin smiled and nonchalantly loosened his grip. I just felt that your hands are very soft, Artorias. Delicate, warm, and the few light and elegant veins underneath. It was indeed a pair of hands as exquisite as a work of art, flawless. Perhaps it was the side effect of innate talent? It sounded a bit embarrassing. But as soon as Alvin saw this girl's hands, he couldn't help but poke. Even though your swordsmanship and agility are so remarkable, your skin is well maintained. I have to say, it possesses an enviable charm. See charm. No one would dislike flattery. Especially when it came from someone admired. Even the girl, flowing with the blood of the Red Dragon, couldn't help but feel genuine joy at being praised like this. However, it seemed like she suddenly remembered something. She immediately lowered her head to glance at her own attire. The girl was wearing rough male peasant clothes made of hemp fabric, and to say that the quality was poor would be putting it politely. At best, it was only cut and tailored to fit. Her smooth golden hair was deliberately cut short for this neutral disguise, tied behind her head. Due to her beauty, she was actually quite popular among the town girls. However, the girl was nothing more than an orphan adopted by a destitute old knight, far from being considered part of any prestigious noble family. As a result, she had never truly been regarded as a companion by her peers. Despite being taught the virtues of a king, she had no interest in chasing after such superficial fame and glory. But facing the admiration of her admirer, the girl couldn't help but feel a hint of embarrassment in her hesitant heart. Rough farm clothes, an unadorned face, and no knowledge of feminine manners. This was her true self. Would she really be attractive? In front of the silver-haired youth, she almost forgot, she had always presented herself as a male. Sorry, I unintentionally caught a glimpse of your sword practice. In my eyes, the truly aesthetic thing is this meticulous dedication. This kind of diligent practice. I must say, I truly admire your perseverance. Merely by observing the subtle facial expressions, Alvin completely understood the girl's thoughts. Saying this, Alvin touched the deep sword marks on the wooden stake with his fingertips. The marks of this sword strike showed no signs of disorder. To achieve such precision with a training wooden sword against a wooden stake required days of monotonous practice. It demanded a combination of talent, skill, and unyielding will. Alvin was sincere in his words, he genuinely admired her. He pursued intellectual novelty, often finding it difficult to endure monotony. Artorias, can I call you that directly? Yes, Sir Alvin. No need for honorifics, Alvin shook his head, smiling gently. We are peers, you can call me by my name. Just like this, try saying it directly. Alvin. As the words fell silent, the resonance lingered. The golden-haired girl stood still, her thin green pupils reflecting the shadow of the silver-haired youth. With a faint smile on his lips, the deep grey eyes seemed to be bathed in the brilliance of sunlight. His neatly combed silver short hair casually scattered, and his unusually tall figure resembled a sharp sword. He wore simple attire, too plain, but it didn't matter at all, because anything draped on him injected soul solely due to the stunning character itself. The iron-grey eyes, overflowing with melancholy, stared like a deity, containing a complex gaze interwoven with love and pity, deep locking a rebellious soul, like a warm winter, like the sun, like an immense and boundless ocean. The silver-haired youth in front seemed like a slowly swirling vortex, causing Artoria to almost find it difficult to look away, as if enchanted and captivated. Alvin. She uttered the words laboriously, like a small beast that had received unexpected favor. Is this okay? Yeah, this is fine. The bonus of a charming young man is quite effective. Sensing the change in the other's gaze, Alvin affirmed her expression with a gentle smile. Since you aspire to be like Silver Star guiding the way, who praised as a knight, does that mean you are also a knight, Artorias? Yes, but only as an apprentice. As she answered like this, she couldn't help but recall Alvin's evaluations about knights. Chasing the name of a knight. The girl couldn't help but ponder, was this desire correct? To become a qualified knight, to gain everyone's recognition, she humbly said, I still have a long way to go. To become a knight doesn't require anyone's recognition, Artorias. Alvin picked up a wooden sword from the ground. Just by the grip marks on the hilt, one could tell. Even in the tedious and repetitive training, the girl poured meticulous effort into it. If you hold the sword because you admire someone's virtue, you might as well ask your own heart first. What do you truly wish to protect by becoming a knight? Ask my own heart. She lowered her head to look at the sword in her hand. The golden-haired girl appeared somewhat absent-minded. Between self-examination, another rough blade had already reached her front. Let's fight. If you still can't come to a conclusion, then use the sword to find the answer. The sword isn't just held in the hand, it's held in the heart. Alvin's thoughts were simple. Through this battle of wills, he wanted to strike her, penetrate her, and ultimately corrupt her. Artoria was unaware. At that moment, longing for the figure before her, she had already taken the first step, towards the abyss. Chapter 16, 16 You and your sword make me laugh. The tip of the sword trembled. Alvin could no longer contain himself. At this moment, he was quite literally experiencing the awakening of his DNA. It was as if a blonde vampire had spotted a deliciously tender little pastry and couldn't wait to indulge. The bloodline from the white dragon made it difficult for Alvin to restrain the urge to humiliate the red dragon. Even if it was just sparring, just training. The pleasure that victory brought, the ultimate ecstasy that made his entire being tremble, was something he wanted to savor. In short, tormenting someone like Artoria was incredibly exhilarating, aside from such base intentions. Alvin also aimed to use this battle to crush the girl's confidence. Abandoned by the Round Table, betrayed by her lineage, close friends going their separate ways, and the nation she valued inching towards collapse. As someone who had witnessed the entire Holy Grail War, Alvin was well aware of the fate that awaited the girl. Born from the distorted desire to be chosen as a king, this pure and innocent girl named Artoria, did she not commit grave sins that warranted enduring such tragic outcomes? Although in one of the alternate endings, she might have eventually found peace. But pain is pain, no matter how you dress it up, it's genuine suffering. Some people go through life without experiencing hardship, while others spend a lifetime trying to heal pain. Why? Yes, why should he bear a terminal illness, why should he rush against time after crossing dimensions, and who would care about so-called cheat abilities if one could lead a happy and stable life? All the comforting words about enduring hardships and being given great responsibilities are lies. They are sweet-talking phrases that numb the heart like bitter medicine. If you feel burdened on your journey, undoubtedly, someone else is ensuring that your years pass peacefully. Whether burdened by the weight of survival or driven by the expectations of many, people struggle on the thorny path. In a sense, he and she shared a common plight. Therefore, with this opportunity for a heart-to-heart confrontation, Alvin didn't want her to fall into the same pitfalls. If she were to waver in her conviction to become a king, lost in this decay. For the girl, perhaps it would be a fortunate turn of events. Clang! The blades clashed, producing a resounding impact. Although bearing the bloodline of the Red Dragon, Alvin was acutely aware that Artoria was not his match at this moment. This wasn't due to differences in aptitude, talent, or attributes. As the artificially created king with dragon's blood, Artoria's stats were monstrous as well, especially with the dragon factor, allowing her to continuously generate magical power just by breathing in this age of gods. She was strong, very strong, stronger than most of the reputed figures in Britannia. Her exaggerated physical strength was similar to his. Even if she were fully developed, she could be considered a genuine humanoid dragon. However, unfortunately, the outcome was decided off-stage long ago. Smack! The wooden sword in his hand was abruptly knocked away, and the girl's attempt to maintain her sword stance collapsed suddenly. She was even sent flying by this heavy blow, falling into a haystack, looking thoroughly disheveled. In less than a minute, the victory and defeat were clear. His sparring partner was none other than vile King Vortigern. Although Alvin didn't know who taught Artoria swordsmanship, surveying all of Britannia now, no one could surpass the descendants of the White Dragon in swordsmanship. Under Vortigern's guidance, Alvin had truly mastered a third of the essence of Vortigern's swordsmanship. However, the gap in swordsmanship alone wouldn't lead to such a stark contrast. The more important reason was too fearful. In combat, you only defend and never dare to exploit weaknesses. Is this the sword technique of a virtuous saint? The girl panted in silence. Alvin frowned, and his words continued to ruthlessly prick at her heart. You aspire to the figure of the Silver Star guiding the way, right? Wanting to protect the townspeople, defeat bandits and monsters, and bring clarity to the chaotic era of Britannia. But when facing plundering bandits and the demonic dragon Vortigern, do you expect them to kindly put down their weapons, submit to execution, and attain enlightenment? Referring to his father as a demonic dragon was a bit over the top in filial piety. But this thoroughly evil title was quite effective, and since his dad couldn't hear it anyway, Alvin used it as material for his writing. Do you still hope that your enemies will have a sudden change of heart and show mercy when facing you? Carrying such a weak mindset, you might as well go home and raise pigs instead of being a knight. The sword conveyed his sentiments more effectively than words. Through this brief clash, Alvin had already discerned the issues that Artoria, who had not yet become a king, was facing at this moment. Longing for the goodness of people, she was too noble, almost to a pathological extent. Because she carried the bloodline of the Red Dragon, even when injured, she could easily recover. Thus, she hesitated to use her full strength against the idol she admired. Always considering others, she overlooked her own position in that bleeding dragon heart. This inevitably reminded Alvin of Emi Yashiro's similarly pathological sense of justice. Of course. If not for harboring such generous determination, she wouldn't be the dazzling king that she was. However, the idea of protecting others through self-harm was undeniably twisted. Alvin wanted to correct all of it. You and your sword make me laugh. The silver-haired youth lifted the sword point expressionlessly, pointing it at the disheveled face of the golden-haired girl. His articulate words rang out like the teachings of a wise man. Are you insulting me? Thinking that I'll show mercy if it's just practice? If you truly want to show respect, then give it your all against me. Thank you for your guidance. Her outstretched hand tremblingly picked up the fallen wooden sword. The girl, panting heavily, slowly rose from the ground and once again assumed a sword stance. Yes, she was well aware of the tremendous power contained within her own body. The swordsmanship taught by her foster father was already familiar to her. In the vast land of Britannia, few could instruct her in combat arts. But, as her foster father accurately pointed out, expecting someone with a kind nature like her to lack the determination to kill, even the crude wooden sword, reinforced by magical power, would become as hard as iron, sharp enough to cut a person in two. Therefore, in past training, the girl had never dared to exert her full strength. Now, a defeat without suspense made her realize, she finally had an opponent strong enough to break free from those constraints. Sorry for offending you, Sir Alvin. Both hands holding the sword in a dignified mid-level stance, the girl exuded a majestic aura that swayed the wheat fields like a gust of wind. However, Alvin stood firm in the midst of this aura, holding the sword high with one hand, facing sideways, looking as if he was full of openings. She gave it her all, but so what? It wasn't enough, far from it. A protective sword meant carrying a burden, far from the carefree and exhilarating swordplay. Alvin could ruthlessly attack her weakest points, but due to the concern for harming others, Artoria's strikes seemed hesitant and indecisive. Bang! 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 The sword blades constantly collided with each other. The girl's wrist holding the sword trembled slightly due to the immense force, and it seemed like her heart was unstable as well. With the disruption of magical power output, the fragile wooden sword could no longer withstand the violent slashes between the dragon keen. Crack! Faint cracks faintly spread on the sword blade, then click! With a resounding sound, the wooden sword in the girl's hand suddenly snapped, and the powerless sword tip fell to the ground, breaking apart inch by inch. The sword broke. It was an even more insulting defeat than being disarmed and losing the sword. Standing in the arena, the girl stared blankly at the broken sword in her hand, looking somewhat dazed. A sword that cannot kill, cannot protect anyone either. Alvin lowered his eyelids. Like the name of the knights that you admire, Artorias, your sword is equally boring. Boring. It was truly a piercing critique. These words must have hurt her deeply. Hoping that she would discard the broken sword and reveal a more lost, confused, and disillusioned, that extremely gratifying expression. However, the girl's resilience far exceeded Alvin's expectations. Ignoring the faint traces of blood in the gaps between her fingers, her fair and delicate wrist trembled slightly, and the girl picked up a new wooden sword from the ground. Again. It's my honor to spar and learn from a strong opponent, please. Please guide me, Sir Alvin. Don't call me sir. Okay, Sir Alvin. If the path is wrong, persisting in it 10,000 times is a futile act. Today, I will make you understand this truth. Was it anger at her stubbornness? No, it was a feeling of self-disgust for being so despicable, wanting her to give up. Just like the girl finally being able to exert her full strength. Facing Artoria, his destined rival, besides Vortigern, she was the strongest opponent Alvin had encountered so far. What followed was the most exhilarating display of effort. The pressure from each other's momentum almost made the wheat field collapse. However, the girl's figure swayed like resilient reeds, but she remained steadfast. Resilient and steadfast, hey? Then, with even greater force, he will completely crush her. If 10,000 are not enough, then 100,000, if 100,000 are not enough, then 1,000,000. The battle intent surged, blood pulsated. The shockwaves around them spread like ripples. Apart from going all out, Alvin completely unleashed the combat posture of an ultimate life form. Under the clear sunlight with no shadows to borrow, it did not affect his own skill performance. Compared to the opponent's stronger force, more exquisite skill, more agile speed, and more dangerous killer moves. Unilateral domination, a match without suspense. Boom! The torrential sword light poured down like a rainstorm onto the precarious sword aura of the girl, once again sending her flying and making her fall awkwardly. And then, the next challenge followed immediately. Come again. Knocked down, she got up. Come again. Blood seeped from Artoria's mouth gripping the sword, she wiped it away. Come again. Wrist dislocated, sword handle broken, she corrected the joint, picked up a new sword. Come again. Her silky golden hair lost its luster, and her delicate face was covered in dirt. However, the deep green eyes of the girl remained as pure and clear as when they first met. Ah, Artoria! The purer the flower, the more inviting it is to be plucked. As if to force her to submit immediately out of anger, Alvin's sword poured down like a torrential rain. The blades clashed, several times, dozens of times, hundreds, thousands of times. In such seemingly tireless sparring. Finally, Alvin saw that her trembling and bleeding fingertips could no longer hold onto the sword. Click! The wooden sword fell from her hand, dropping to the ground, kicking up dust carried by the wind. Under the sunlight, the girl let out a faint and powerless sob. Sorry, Sir Alvin. Who? Alvin slowly exhaled a breath. Besides the expected outcome, he also felt a tinge of sorrow. Well, after being defeated so many times, has she finally realized the absurdity of her beliefs and decided to give up? With a heart full of despair, this is the first step towards corruption, Artoria. Thinking this way. In Alvin's almost sluggish expression, the disheveled girl sat down in the haystack, rubbing her stomach with a distressed expression. I'm so hungry. Chapter 17, 17 Delving into her stomach is delving into her heart. It wasn't because she was defeated that she gave up. It was because she was hungry. Dropping the sword for such a reason inevitably plunged Alvin into a difficult and unspoken silence. Indeed, more potent than Artoria's sword was her stomach, and he had forgotten such an important matter. Ah, I really got beaten up badly, Sir Alvin. The girl, rubbing her exhausted stomach, although sore all over, was nothing compared to the agony of hunger. Don't call me sir. All right, Sir Alvin. I'm not older than you, well, whatever. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. Today, this hurdle was insurmountable, Alvin chose to abandon the training. Soon after, both of them heard the loud and prolonged moaning emanating from the girl's abdomen. Gurgle. Ha ha ha. Hungry, being hungry is unavoidable. You need strength to practice after all. If you don't mind, would you like to come back with me? The golden-haired girl, somewhat embarrassed, hugged her arms. Then, her gaze froze suddenly, as if frozen, as she saw Alvin bend down and reach into his own shadow, groping around. Soon. Mushrooms, bird eggs, vegetables, chestnuts, berries. All meticulously preserved by Alvin's shadow magic, a whole bag of fresh ingredients was thrown directly in front of the girl. Tidy up, I'll start a fire. In Artoria's surprised expression, Alvin pulled out an iron pot from the shadow, skillfully set up a makeshift stove. He ignited the straw, blanched the ingredients in water, stir-fried them with melted animal fat, and finally simmered them in clear spring water. Although the handling was simple, the natural wild game quickly emitted a rich aroma. Cooking smoke is the best way to attract bandits. Alvin had used this method to catch several big fish, the nearby bandits were almost wiped out by him. Now, whenever they saw smoke, they would run for their lives. Tisk, all the fish were gone. He grabbed a handful of coarse salt and sprinkled it into the soup, creating a burst of fragrant aroma. The girl's esophagus began to unconsciously swallow saliva. Eat, there's nothing better on such short notice. Handing a wooden bowl to the girl, Alvin began to taste it without much confidence. Indeed, after tasting a small sip of the mushroom meat soup, he couldn't help but furrow his brows slightly. Even if it's not delicious, it shouldn't be so bad. Unfortunately, this wasn't intentional, nor was it accidental or a problem with handling the ingredients. It was simply a limitation of the era. Britain in the 5th century had not developed a systematic cultivation of spices and seasonings. In simple terms, except for salt, Alvin had to search for seasonings in the forest. The makeshift stove was also hard to compare with professional cookware. Therefore, insufficient heat, bland taste, and only the seasoning of coarse salt. This dish tasted a bit monotonous. The natural flavor of the ingredients was indeed delicious, but for a stomach trained by modern technology, it was not particularly impressive. How should he put it? The taste is not good for his preference. However, gurgle, this is, gurgle, so delicious. Sir Alvin. Accompanied by intermittent swallowing sounds. The girl's sincere admiration echoed from her side. The rich flavor of the meat juice combined with the deliciousness of the mushrooms melted in her mouth. The fragrance of salt and spices blended with a hint of nutty sweetness, repeatedly stimulating the undeveloped taste buds, until it went down, the infinite aftertaste still filled her mouth. In this world, there can still be such delicious food. The golden-haired girl, who usually filled her stomach with coarse grains, took small bites of the mushroom meat soup, and the overly wonderful taste made her pupils seem to shine. Already too busy to care about her dining etiquette, she quickly finished the entire bowl, licking her lips as if she was not satisfied. This child, who had never had a full meal since childhood, made Alvin feel a sense of pity. A stomach worthy of a king, how did it fall to this? Could it be? Alvin couldn't help but think of such a possibility. Artorias, are your family treating you harshly? An adopted child, subjected to the cold treatment of the original family, such a plot was quite common in various senses. Ha, why do you ask that, sir? There's absolutely no such thing. Just a feeling. Alvin chose his words carefully. You seem to have a good appetite. No, it's just that I've never eaten such delicious food. Sir Alvin's cooking is like magic. It's just a skillless hand, nothing to mention. Alvin did speak the truth. As a person from the modern period, this level of cooking, even scrambled eggs with tomatoes would be harder. Not to mention, can a dish that doesn't glow be considered a good dish? At least it should make people blush and burst their clothes on the spot. Ah, modesty, righteous deeds, superb swordsmanship, and even impeccable culinary skills. When can I grow up to be as excellent as Sir Alvin? I'm not a good person. You'll regret thinking like that sooner or later. How could that be? I will do my best to try to catch up with your figure. Yes, how could that be? He hopes that when the time comes, she can still think like this. The breeze gently rustled the golden wheat field. The girl and the boy sat on the ground, observing her profile with the corner of his eye. Alvin clearly saw the longing contained in her expression. Good, just like this. Chase, yearn, admire. The more longing, the more the moment of disillusionment becomes extremely delightful. If he couldn't defeat her physically, then he would use a heart-wrenching method. He was really looking forward to the moment when his identity was revealed. Looking forward to her face, revealing an expression of disbelief, astonishment, and indignation. In this way, gradually delve into her heart through the way into her stomach. Alvin thought, maybe he was truly a villain filled with evil, perhaps. Chapter 18, Uncontainable Happiness. A pot of clear stew could never satisfy the abyss-like stomach of the king's stomach. Alvin, attempting to corrode Artoria with sugar-coated bullets, opened up his food supply. Various carefully collected wild ingredients emerged from the shadows, appearing like a miraculous bounty. The girl's eyes sparkled at the sight. I can afford to treat you to a meal, these ingredients are all gathered from the forest, so no need to worry about the cost. How can this be a kind gesture? Half an hour later. Verb. The golden-haired girl, after enjoying the meal and berries, finally lay back on the haystack, contentedly letting out a satisfied burp. Ah! I've never been this satisfied in my whole life. Even if I were to die now, I'd have no regrets. Is that so? Alvin looked at the depleted inventory in his storage shadow, which was enough to feed 3 adult men for half a month. Well, the truth behind the fall of Britain has been found. What an enviable appetite you have. Indeed, being able to eat is a blessing. However, looking at Artoria's figure, which was as lean as a man's, where did all these fats go? A mystery of Britain that remains unsolved. But as the saying goes, without a flat chest, how can one support the world below? Perhaps it's because she harbors a vision of world peace. Sitting by the girl's side, Alvin lightly wiped the notches on the sword. While broken wooden swords were scattered everywhere, the one he picked up had been used from start to finish, without a visible crack. Mastering enhancement Magecraft could turn anything into a weapon. Alvin's shadow attribute could add characteristics like concealment, silence, and visual distortion to it. Although it didn't match the unmatched sharpness of a noble phantasm, it could be considered a masterful weapon. Altogether, Artoria fell into a disadvantage in this aspect. During the collision of the sword bodies, Alvin's magical power eroded hers, leading to a deterioration of the sword when the battle was prolonged. I believe you've noticed it yourself. The gap between us is not as exaggerated as it seems. Although my swordsmanship is more advanced than yours, the reason you lose is that you are too conservative, Artorias. You always focus on defense and rarely use aggressive moves. The girl tilted her head. But you're not my enemy, Alvin. If you accidentally get hurt, I'll be troubled in dealing with it. What about you getting hurt? Alvin questioned. It's okay if others get hurt, but it doesn't matter if you get hurt yourself. I can recover. Let me tell you a secret, I'm naturally resilient to beatings. Wiping the bloodstains off her face with rough burlap, her words were carefree yet filled with joy, as if she had no regrets about being defeated. Alvin fell silent for a moment. It's this kind of personality, not considering oneself, that leads to your tragedy. Being so happy after being beaten, do you have any peculiar hobbies? Of course. The girl naturally didn't understand Alvin's teasing, smiling and saying, because it's really happy to make friends, not to mention you treated me to a meal. Hearing this, Alvin couldn't help but pause. Friends? Even though I mercilessly beat you so miserably, do you think I'm your friend? You obviously held back in taking care of me, even I, as dull as I am, can see that. Looking at her radiant smile, Alvin shifted his gaze away. Held back? No, it's more like discovering an interesting toy and wanting to break it. Faced with the girl's answer, he couldn't bear to look directly into those clear, jewel-like eyes. Considering the situation here, you've been training alone for a long time, haven't you? The silver-haired youth lowered his eyelids, attempting to change the topic. Artorias, don't tell me you don't have any friends. It's a bit embarrassing to say, but unlike you, sir. I don't have any attractive qualities to be popular. It sounded like humble words. To some extent, it was the truth. Excessive beauty only brought about jealousy among peers. Moreover, because of her special status, she was well aware that she couldn't flaunt it. As she described herself, I don't have any attractive qualities. Plain and low-key, these were the qualities that allowed the girl to live each day peacefully. Her origin is both complex and unique. Why did she live her life disguised as a man? Why did she start practicing swordsmanship, learning state affairs, and being advised to abandon human emotions since childhood? Because, the girl was expected to become Britain's ideal king. Weak humans have limits. Uther, defeated by Vortigern, understood this. So, if it wasn't human, perhaps it could surpass the limitations of being human, discard the troubles of being human. Thus, following this train of thought, Uther and Merlin attempted to create an ideal king to rule Britain perfectly. She was created for this purpose, a vessel belonging to the king. For this reason, the girl never saw the true faces of her parents. In fact, she couldn't insert any emotions regarding the hopes or desires of the late King Uther. For the daily teachings from her teacher Merlin, she didn't feel any special duty or moved. Over these 11 years, the only thing that constantly motivated her was her foster father and foster brother, the ordinary days they spent together, and the joyful laughter of the people living in the town. But that wasn't admiration or love. It was just because she wanted to protect this peace, something she considered a good deed. Without indignation, without questioning, and without any resentment, the girl calmly accepted her heritage. Sometimes, she would think that if she became a member of the town, spending her life in peace with her family, how nice it would be, but she didn't dare to have such a luxurious wish. Even if she occasionally imagined such a happy scene in her mind, she immediately sobered up and dispelled those thoughts. Because the girl knew from the bottom of her heart that if she made such a choice, she would only lose everything. The girl named Artoria exists to become a king. The vast Britain cannot contain the happiness of this lone existence. But at least, friend. She would occasionally fantasize about having a close friend to talk to. Chapter 19, completely tainting this divinity. At this moment, facing the admired idol before her, the girl felt as if her heart had relaxed like never before. Ah, friendship, indeed, it's a relationship that makes people incredibly at ease. However, as she looked at Alvin's lowered eyelids and his hesitant expression, the girl immediately, once again, realized her rudeness. Sorry. I assumed without permission that you're my friend. No, I'm happy to be your first friend, Artorias. Alvin smiled like this, gazing over the vast golden wheat field. Friend. This was a great opportunity to get closer and corrupt her. Not only that, you'll have more and more friends in the future. Don't underestimate yourself. Thank you. Sir Alvin. Surprisingly, she got so excited about having a friend that her face turned red. No, it seemed like blood was seeping from her forehead. Looking at the excited expression on the girl's face. Unknowingly, Alvin felt a slight tremor in his heart, a feeling he didn't want to dwell on, pity and sadness. It might be a bit presumptuous, but if you have time, can you come and practice with me more in the future? The girl looked at the broken wooden swords on the ground, deciding that she needed to make a new batch in the future. However, she seemed a bit troubled. After having your meal and making such an unreasonable request, I feel like I don't have anything to repay you. Gulp, thinking about these things made her feel more and more ashamed. The girl seemed like she wanted to bury herself in the ground. I always wanted to ask, is this wheat field owned by Sir Ector? Is that your? It's mine, my father's. Originally, Sir Ector didn't allow her to address him with these words. But now, he couldn't hear it anyway, so calling him that shouldn't be a problem, right? Although it was forbidden to speak. In her heart, the girl had long acknowledged this fact. That's great, then. I would like to borrow your land to see the prosperous growth of this wheat field. If you can lease or sell it to me, it would be a great help. Actually, Alvin didn't necessarily need the land here. If he asked, his old man would naturally allocate a large piece of fertile land in Londinium to him, and he might even send a few batches of people to pick cotton or something. But, if he did that, there would be no reason to frequently approach Artoria. The feeling of being needed is an advanced emotional need. Even if it's a trivial request, like helping peel an apple. Expressing an attitude of needing each other is the best way to close the relationship. It could be considered a philosophy of life that Alvin had developed in his previous life, where he mingled. Oh. If my father hears about your request, he will definitely agree happily. But Sir Alvin, are you planning to farm? The girl looked at Alvin somewhat incredulously. Someone with such strong combat skills actually stooping to work in the field seemed so contrasting, just like King Arthur being a woman. I have topics I want to research. Saying that, Alvin couldn't help but recall the disdainful faces of those people at the clock tower when he was researching wheat production. Saying something like mudfooters only deserve to farm, but Alvin was very foresight and applied for a patent in advance. So, even though the price was exorbitant, now the noble families are fighting to buy his genuine brand flour, rich in ether. It is said to be more magical than ordinary food. Magicians also need the essentials of life. One can only say that old folks don't understand the saying food is life, they just like to suck their blood and watch their painful expressions. As for sword practice, sparring with you is also a way for me to hone myself. I'm naturally happy to do so. However, Artorias, your swordsmanship, such pointless persistence will only make your path more and more thorny. Alvin bluntly pointed out her immaturity, realizing how difficult it is to uphold the righteous path of peace in this chaotic world. However, that must be because I'm still not strong enough. The girl just smiled in response. If I become strong enough to not need to brandish my sword, then even facing the dragon Vortigern, I could make him surrender, leaving an opportunity for us to communicate, right? As her words faded away, the lingering sound seemed to resonate in the wind. Her soft golden hair swayed in the breeze, and Alvin looked at the girl in male attire in front of him, unable to say a word. It's a bit too glaring. How could there be such a stubborn fellow in the world? The sky was clear, without a cloud in sight. The vast and boundless mature wheat field resembled a golden sea. Under the radiant sunshine, the girl's smiling face seemed to be coated with a brilliant and splendid color. Through this bright sunlight, Alvin seemed to catch a glimpse of the girl's clear and pure dragon's heart. Ah! Artoria! Abandoning the despicable aspects of being human, replaced by a pure and untainted divinity. The more he realized this, the more indignant he felt about her tragic fate. Not seen as a person, but rather as an incredibly useful tool, what had people turned her into? Facing the girl's radiant smile. Unable to look away, yet wanting to pluck it for himself. Yes. It's this kind of Artoria that is worth leading her down the path of corruption. The bloodline of the white dragon was surging, desires and compassion seemed to coexist at this moment. This dazzling divinity. Alvin wanted to completely defile her. Sir Alvin. closer. Too close. Looking at the overly close face of the young man, the girl's palms involuntarily tightened around the wheat spikes on the ground. A subtle blush spread on her delicate cheeks. A slight dizziness emerged in her mind. Should she step back? Or, should she go along with it? Her body didn't know how to respond. But without a doubt, those slowly swirling, iron-grey eyes, as if emitting a kind of bewitching magic, made it almost impossible to look away. They stared at each other with a hint of stiffness. Until a distant call abruptly snapped the girl out of this trance. Lily! I brought you! Sharp eyes saw the two people overly close in the wheat field. The words shouted by the young man suddenly froze. You son of a bitch, what are you doing to my sis, brother? Dropping the lunchbox in his hand, the golden-haired young man rushed from the edge of the wheat field, reaching out to grab the silver-haired young man's collar. And then Alvin directly flipped him over with a backhand, and he fell to the ground with a thud. What the hell, you bastard! The handsome young man with blonde hair propped himself up on his arm, painfully climbing up from the ground. When he looked up and saw Alvin's face, he couldn't help but pause. What's going on? This can't be. How could there be a man who looks better than me? Are you damn an incubus? This way of speaking by this mouthy guy, why does it sound so familiar? Looking at the blonde young man in front of him, Alvin, who had never seen this guy before, always felt a sense of déjà vu. He couldn't remember the answer for a while. But faced with such impolite words, he wouldn't say anything good either. Who the hell are you? I'm your old man, you brat. Well, wanting to be my old man, are you filled with evil deeds? Even Vortigern is not as impressive as you. The tense atmosphere spread across the wheat field in an instant. The blonde young man slapped off the dust on his body, twisted his neck, and directly drew the iron sword from his waist, momentarily as if cold light was overflowing. Regardless of who you are, you better stay away from my brother, or my sword won't know mercy. Oh, Artoria's brother, hey? Alvin understood it now, and his response was, none of your damn business. Good, come. I will teach you a lesson you'll remember for the rest of your life. The blonde young man rushed up. The blonde young man drew his sword. The blonde young man fell. Looking at the young man who fell in front of him, Alvin felt a bit speechless. He hadn't even started using his strength, and this guy just fell down. The gap between ultimate life form and ordinary people is apparently too difficult to overcome. Just this? My evaluation for you is worse than your brother's. You bastard, damn, this monstrous strength is like. Stop, don't fight anymore. Chapter 20, 20k. The dissuasion from the younger sister did not have any effect on the battle between men. On the contrary, it seemed to further stimulate his quarrelsome spirits. Thus, with wooden swords against a steel one, you directly brought down this youth to the point where he could barely straighten his back. Looking at the golden-haired youth lying breathless on the grass, he felt thoroughly bullied by you. Watching this guy in a miserable state. Holding on to the belief of killing the heart, not the body, you extended your palm toward him. You could see that his body surrendered, but his heart did not. After turning away your hand, he struggled to get up on his own. Under the scorching sun, both on the body and the heart, this fight was making everyone a bit parched. Thinking about this, you, like Doraemon, reached into the shadow and took out a cup of fruit wine, handing it to him. Giving a nod to his adoptive sister, the blonde youth reluctantly took it over, frowned, took a small sip, and then revealed a surprised expression. Brewed with Magecraft to control the temperature, this drink was naturally incomparable to the crude brewing techniques of this British village. Good wine when friends come, if the wolves come, welcome them with light cannons. Humming a strange exotic tune, you helped pick up the lunchbox the young man had dropped on the ground, looking at the rough dry food inside and feeling a bit choked. King Arthur at home, eats this. Well, I found the reason why they don't understand human hearts. This nutritional standard, no wonder it's so flat. For certain special reasons, and since you didn't manage to eat enough, although it was still high noon, as a Londoner, it didn't hinder you from having a proper afternoon tea. You took out all the remaining stock from the shadow and built a new barbecue grill on the spot. You then headed to the nearby stream, as fishing, a job that required both strength and precision, was useless if you only had brute strength. As the ultimate life form, your agile nerves and actions were beyond what these fishing amateurs could reach. Soon, with the expressions of the siblings swallowing their saliva, you returned with a basket full of wild fish. Sir Alvin, where did you learn this mountain and water skill? Bear Grylls, Britain's wilderness survival expert. 21st century Great Britain is still Great Britain, no problem. Although they had never heard of this name, Artoria and her brother still showed great respect for this expert. Your skillful grilling technique fascinated even magical creatures, and it was a piece of cake to captivate these rural knights' taste buds. They were naturally at your mercy. After a satisfying meal and an opportunity to chat while drinking, you quickly learned that the golden-haired youth who came up for a beating was named Kay, Artoria's older brother. Oh, it turns out it's like this. Sorry, I spoke too loudly before. Alvin, you are my friend from now on. Let me cover you. The golden-haired youth laughed heartily, but... weren't you going to be my old man? How did you suddenly become my friend? Looking at this Artoria's foster brother, Kay, if he wasn't compared to the humanoid dragon like Alvin and Artoria, his combat skill were actually outstanding among peers. Now, he had even obtained the formal title of a knight. Gazing across the entire Essex county, such an existence was indeed rare. Unfortunately, the value of this name seemed to be not very high. After all, he couldn't perform divination, nor could he deal 50% extra damage in one-on-one combat. Through the exchange, Alvin naturally could see that Kay was not a bad guy. He was just straightforward and outspoken, consistently true to himself. In other words, the typical guy who will insult you to your face. However, Alvin was far superior in skills compared to Kay, who was constantly influenced by the modern day. His ability to spray enemies 4 at a time was unparalleled. Don't underestimate the foul language, hiding words is an art. I seem to have heard you, Kay, calling Artorias as Lily. Tapping the wine glass, Alvin knowingly asked. That sounds like the name of a cute girl, doesn't it? Well. Kay showed an awkward expression, glanced at his sister with tightly pursed lips. This was the trouble caused by his big mouth, so he could only explain it hard. Lily, yes. Lily. It's just a nickname for my dear brother. I see, your relationship as brothers is really good. Merlin's Magecraft was not so easy to decipher, so when this statement came out, Kay, who understood this point, knew that Alvin was still in the dark. He breathed a sigh of relief. Although that white-haired guy kept mixing eating and waiting to die and never intermittently hesitated, he was still the great Magus by Uther's side. This illusion skill had an outstanding effect. However, upon closer inspection, the silver-haired Alvin indeed looked so charming. How could there be such a guy with a face that broke all the rules? Could it be that he really half incubus like Merlin? After all, Merlin with that white hair, Kay naturally knew that the guy was always fooling around and not doing serious work, but he could attract beautiful women. It was all thanks to his half incubus face. Thinking of Merlin, Kay couldn't help but feel envious and jealous. Not to mention Lily. Looking at the silver-haired boy in front of him, he couldn't help but find it hard to look away. Tisk, Kay considered himself normal in orientation, he undoubtedly liked women, preferably those very hot ones. Anyway, Lily's disguise couldn't be exposed, and having a sparring partner who was skilled with a sword was undoubtedly a good thing. Thinking like this, Kay couldn't help but feel a bit ashamed. As the older brother, he couldn't beat his own sister and could only say that he was willing but unable to perform the role of a sparring partner. There was no way. After all, humans couldn't compare with dragons. So, how did this guy, who could beat Lily so badly, even more monstrous than monsters, appear out of nowhere? Asking in this way might be a bit presumptuous, but I wonder about Alvin's family background. As the words fell silent, the scene suddenly became somewhat stagnant. After a while, the silver-haired boy spoke in a low voice. Now, Britain is my home. Saying this, the young man lowered his eyelids somewhat sadly. Although he had learned to instinctively conceal his race aura, Alvin couldn't be sure if Merlin had taught him the Magecraft to detect lies. Therefore, he didn't give a direct answer to this question. Even so, these profound words were already enough. An exceptionally stunning appearance could often overshadow all other shortcomings, and even a simple dress could inject soul into it. Because everyone was looking at the face, no one would usually care about what Alvin was wearing. However, if you observed carefully, you could find that the silver-haired youth's clothes were very simple, with the usual style of civilians, light and practical, with quite a few sewn patches. This was by no means something a nobleman could tolerate. Even if he was a nobleman, he could only be a destitute and fallen, only son. Yes. If there were still family members to take care of him, who would let an 11-year-old boy go alone to crusade against ruthless mountain bandits and monsters? This kind of talented teenager, which aristocratic family wouldn't cherish him like a treasure? Not to mention his face, just this combat talent was a natural genius. If he died prematurely, it would be a huge loss. Those exquisite survival skills in the wild, how did the boy master them, were self-evident. Looking at Alvin's dim, ashy eyes. Although he was still eating someone else's grilled fish and drinking someone else's fine wine, he still initially wanted to discipline this young man. Kay couldn't help but feel that he really wasn't a decent person.
Thanks for listening.